Welcome back to another story on Bald Voldemort. This time we're bringing you What If Harry Was Chosen by the Phoenix Force and Hogwarts Became His Battleground. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, Ignition. The letter came on a Tuesday, which Harry thought was a strange day for anything important to happen. He'd been scrubbing the inside of the oven, Aunt Petunia's particular brand of punishment for the incident with the garden hose, which honestly hadn't been his fault. The water had simply gone where he needed it to go. When the envelope dropped through the mail slot and slid across the linoleum like it had somewhere urgent to be, he heard Uncle Vernon's sharp intake of breath from the hallway, the specific kind that meant something was wrong in a way Vernon Dursley couldn't immediately shout at. Harry had known about the letters before he read them, not because he was clever about it, though he was, but because he'd felt them coming the way you feel a storm before the clouds arrive. A warmth behind his sternum, low and steady like a coal that refused to cool. He'd been feeling it more often lately, since his birthday. Since he'd turned 11 and woken in the night to find his hands glowing faintly orange in the dark of his cupboard, he'd told no one, obviously. The war over the letters was almost funny in retrospect, Vernon boarding windows, Petunia burning envelopes. The family driving to increasingly remote locations, while Harry sat in the backseat watching his uncle's neck turn progressively darker shades of red. And then Hagrid had come through the door of that shack on the rock, and the warmth in Harry's chest had leapt like a dog recognizing its owner, and Hagrid had sat down and said, "You're a wizard, Harry," with the specific gravity of someone delivering news they assumed would be devastating. Harry had said, "Yeah, I know." Hagrid had blinked. "You what?" "I mean, I didn't know the word for it." Harry had turned his palm up and let the small flame sit there, a perfectly round sphere of fire about the size of a marble, burning without consuming anything, casting warm light on both their faces. But I knew something was going on. Hagrid had stared at that flame for a long time without speaking. He'd said very quietly, "I'm going to need to write a letter before we go to Diagon Alley." Dumbledore read Hagrid's letter twice, then set it down on his desk and sat for a long time looking at the phoenix on its perch. Fawkes tilted his head. His feathers were very bright that evening, full-plumed and burning, and he was watching the headmaster with the particular patience of something that has lived long enough to know that most crises resolve themselves. "Well," Dumbledore said finally, "that's interesting." Fawkes made a sound that was not quite a trill. It was something older, something that came from further down in his chest than song usually reached. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up a quill and wrote 2 letters, one to the ministry and one he sealed 3 times over and locked in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the unbreakable charm on it. Diagon Alley was extraordinary. Harry walked through it the way he walked through most things, forward, eyes open, processing. He watched the magic around him with an attention that Hagrid kept mistaking for wonder. It wasn't wonder exactly. It was more like recognition, like walking into a room where you'd never been and knowing exactly which floorboard would creak. Gringotts impressed him. The goblins impressed him more. There was something in their eyes when they looked at him, something that flickered past polite commerce into something older and more careful, and one of them, the oldest-looking one at the far desk, watched Harry walk by and said something very quietly in gobbledygook to his colleague that made the colleague go still. Harry filed that away. Ollivander's was the moment everything changed. He tried 11 wands before Ollivander went still in the middle of the shop, wandless, with a look on his face like a man who has just found evidence of something he suspected but hoped was wrong. "Curious," Ollivander said. "You keep saying that," Harry said. "Because it keeps being true." Ollivander went to the back of the shop and came back with something that wasn't in a box. It was wrapped in black cloth that seemed slightly scorched around the edges, and he handled it with the specific reverence of someone who has waited a long time to pass something on. "This wand," he said, setting it on the counter, "has never chosen anyone. I made it 43 years ago and I've been waiting for the right person. Holly, 11 inches. A phoenix feather at its core, but not from any phoenix I know. The feather appeared in my workshop one morning, just there on the bench, burning without burning, as if it had been left deliberately." Harry reached for it before Ollivander finished speaking. The moment his fingers touched the handle, the warmth in his chest didn't leap or spike, it settled, like a door closing in a house that had always been slightly open, finally quietly shutting. The wand threw no sparks, no shower of gold. It simply hummed a deep resonant sound that Harry felt in his back teeth and went still. Every candle in the shop flared to its full height and held there. "Yes," Ollivander said softly. "I thought so." "What did you think?" Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him with those silver eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, "That some things in this world are older than wand lore. Older than magic even as we understand it. You'll do great things, Harry Potter, terrible and great." He paused. "But I suspect you already know that." "Not really," Harry said honestly, "but I'm working on it. The Hogwarts Express left at 11 o'clock, and Harry found the compartment with the sleeping red-haired boy mostly by the process of all the other compartments being full, though the warmth in his chest seemed to nudge him gently in the right direction, the way a current nudges a boat. Ron Weasley woke up, blinked, offered to share his sandwiches, and within 20 minutes was talking with the specific unself-conscious energy of someone who had spent his entire life surrounded by brothers and was therefore completely unbothered by the concept of strangers. Harry liked him immediately, not because of the sandwiches, though the sandwiches were very good. "You're that Harry Potter," Ron had said about 10 minutes in, staring at Harry's forehead. "I'm the only Harry Potter I know of." "Right, yeah, obviously," Ron kept staring. "Does it hurt, the scar?" "Not right now." Harry touched it absently. The scar was warm today, not burning, just warm like a coal banked for the night. It had been like that since his birthday. Before that it had been a dull thing, barely noticeable, occasionally itchy. Sometimes it gets bright. Bright, like lit up from the inside, gold. Ron stared at him. "Scars don't glow gold." "No," Harry agreed, "they don't." A beat of silence. Then Ron said, "Wicked," with the specific reverence of an 11-year-old confronted with something he doesn't understand but instinctively approves of, and they moved on to discussing Quidditch. Hermione Granger found them looking for a toad. She had the focused, slightly impatient energy of someone who has done a great deal of reading and would very much like someone else to appreciate it. She catalogued their toad search options in about 30 seconds, catalogued Harry with about 15, catalogued Ron with 12, and then looked at Harry's wand lying on the seat beside him. "Is that holly?" she said. "That's unusual. Most modern wands use more stable cores. The wood pairing must be very specific." She reached out not to touch it, just indicating. "May I?" "Sure," Harry said. She picked it up. The wand did nothing. No warmth, no response, simply an 11-inch piece of holly with an unusual feather at its core, inert as a stick. Hermione set it down and looked at Harry with eyes that had shifted from cataloging to something more genuine. "That's a very unusual wand," she said. "Can I ask, when you hold it, does it feel different from when I do?" "Considerably," Harry said. She nodded, the way people nod when a hypothesis is confirmed. "Fascinating." And then she sat down, apparently having decided the toad could wait, and said, "What can you do?" Ron looked slightly alarmed by this conversational approach. Harry found it refreshing. "Not sure yet," he said. "Show me some of what you've read and I'll tell you if any of it fits." They talked until the train pulled into Hogsmeade. The boats, the lake, the ceiling full of candles, the great hall wide and crowded and buzzing with the particular noise of several hundred children in a stone room. Harry walked in and felt it all, like weather, the excitement, the nerves, the ambient magic of a building that had been saturated with spellwork for 1,000 years. It sat on his skin like sunlight. And underneath it all, quiet and constant, the warmth in his chest pulsed. The sorting hat was placed on a stool. Students were called one by one. Harry watched it work, watched the hat droop over each student's ears and then shout a house name with what seemed like genuine conviction. This one had taken 6 seconds, that one had taken 30. It seemed to know exactly where people belonged, sharp and certain. "Potter, Harry." The hall went quiet in a way that didn't feel like silence. It felt like everyone sucking in air at once and forgetting to let it out. Harry walked up, sat on the stool, and let the hat drop over his eyes. Darkness. The smell of old felt and older magic. And then a voice, dry and ancient, that sounded like rustling pages. Well, Harry didn't say anything. "I have sorted every student who walked through that hall for the better part of 1,000 years, the hat said. It sounded, Harry thought, slightly rattled, which he suspected was not a common state for it. "I have read 1,000 kinds of courage, 1,000 kinds of cunning, 1,000 kinds of knowledge and ambition. I have sat on the heads of dark wizards and light ones, cowards and heroes, fools and prodigies." A pause. "I have never sat on anything like this." "The fire," it said, quieter. "It goes all the way down." "Does that mean you can't sort me?" Harry asked, keeping his voice low enough that only the hat could hear. "It means I can see your qualities perfectly well. Bravery, yes. Intelligence, yes. Loyalty, yes. But beneath all of them there is something that doesn't belong to any of my 4 founders. Something older. It is not Godric's fire. It is not Rowena's brilliance. It is—" The hat stopped speaking. And in the silence inside the old felt, Harry heard something he hadn't expected. A sound like wings, enormous and slow, and a warmth that came not from his chest this time but from everywhere, from the air itself, from the hat against his forehead, from the 1,000-year stones of the hall. The hat said, in a voice suddenly very different from its first voice, lower, wider, as if something were speaking through it, "Fire," just that, one word, shouted into the stunned hall, then silence. Harry lifted the hat off his head. He didn't know what his face looked like, but Hermione, sitting at the table nearest him, had gone very still and pale in a way that looked less like fear and more like a person who has encountered something that exceeded her models. McGonagall cleared her throat. "Gryffindor," she said crisply, because something had to fill the silence, and she had been filling difficult silences for 40 years. Harry sat down at the Gryffindor table. Ron was 3 seats down and gave him a wide-eyed thumbs up. The hat sat on its stool and didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. Up at the head table, Dumbledore sat very still with his hands folded and his half-moon glasses catching the candlelight, and he watched Harry Potter take his seat at the Gryffindor table with an expression that was precisely, carefully neutral. Across the table, Quirinus Quirrell gripped his goblet and did not look up. The feast was excellent. Harry ate with the specific appreciation of someone who had spent 11 years eating whatever happened to be left over after Dudley had finished, and said so, and made Ron laugh so hard that pumpkin juice came out of his nose, which cemented the friendship more effectively than anything else could have. Draco Malfoy materialized at the edge of the Gryffindor table during dessert with the specific swagger of someone who has rehearsed a dramatic entrance. "Potter," he said, "heard you got sorted. Bet your parents would have been ashamed, Gryffindor of all things." Harry looked up from his treacle tart. He looked at Draco Malfoy the way he might look at a weather forecast, with interest but without alarm. He catalogued the expensive robes, the practiced sneer, the 2 larger boys flanking him like parentheses around a sentence that thought more of itself than it deserved. "Did you want something?" Harry said. "Or did you just come over to audition for whatever this is?" Ron made a small sound of suppressed laughter. Hermione pressed her lips together. Malfoy blinked. He'd been prepared for deference or aggression, and this mild, almost bored attention wasn't in the script. "I'm Draco Malfoy," he said, as if that would clarify things. "I know," Harry said. "We met in Madame Malkin's." He went back to his tart. Draco stood there for a moment with the specific expression of someone whose theater has been interrupted by a technical fault, then turned and left, the 2 bookends following him in slightly less organized fashion. Ron was grinning. "He's been like that all day. Told me on the train that Hermione was a mudblood, which Hermione, I should have punched him, I just didn't know the spell for it yet." Hermione opened her mouth. Harry said, "What's a mudblood?" The explanation that followed occupied the rest of dessert and left Harry with the impression of a world with a specific kind of structural rot in it, the kind that was polished carefully on the outside and very dark underneath. He filed that away too. The dormitory was at the top of a spiral staircase and contained 5 4-poster beds with deep red curtains and a window that looked out over the grounds toward the dark edge of the Forbidden Forest. Harry changed into his pajamas, climbed into bed, and lay in the dark listening to the breathing of 4 other boys slow into sleep. The warmth in his chest didn't quiet. It never entirely did, he'd noticed. It was always there, always present, the way your own heartbeat is present, so constant you only noticed it when it changed. It changed now. Behind his scar, something shifted. Not pain, not the searing green agony that Voldemort's curse had apparently left as a parting gift, or at least not that. This was gold. It was what fire looked like from the inside. His scar blazed with it, and he raised one hand in the dark and saw his fingers outlined in faint, pale gold light, warm as candle flame, steady as dawn. He turned his hand back and forth. The light caught the dust motes floating near his bed and turned them briefly to brief, burning sparks. "You are the flame that was not meant to go out." It wasn't a voice exactly. It was more like a thought that was too big to be his own, too wide, too deep, like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup and the cup simply becoming the ocean instead. It sat in his chest where the warmth lived and breathed with his breathing, and it was not frightening. That was the most surprising part. Harry Potter had spent 11 years afraid of things. Uncle Vernon's belt, Dudley's fists, the particular way Petunia looked at him when she thought no one was watching, as if he were a stain she didn't know how to clean. 11 years of being afraid of his own shadow, of his own inexplicable magic, of the way things moved when he was angry or upset or simply needed them to. This was not that. This was something choosing him back. He closed his hand around the warmth and held it, and the fire settled like a sleeping animal, and Harry Potter looked at the dark ceiling of his first-ever real bedroom and felt, for the first time in his memory, entirely, completely unafraid. Potions, as it turned out, was going to be a problem, not because Harry was bad at it. He wasn't. He'd read the textbook twice on the train and found the underlying logic of potion making sensible and interesting, the way cooking was sensible and interesting to someone who'd spent years doing it out of necessity. He understood the why of it, which meant the how came easier. The problem was Professor Snape. He swept into the dungeon classroom like weather, black robes settling around him with the practiced stillness of a man who understood the tactical value of dramatic pausing. He looked at each student with the unhurried contempt of someone who had been doing this for years and found new ways to be disappointed every time. His eyes landed on Harry and held. Harry looked back. He was sitting between Ron and Hermione, his quill ready, his notebook open, entirely prepared to learn something. He met Snape's gaze without looking away, without the flinch that Snape seemed to be waiting for, and watched something cross the professor's face that wasn't quite surprise but was close enough to it. "Potter," Snape said. His voice was very quiet, That kind of quiet that was trained to carry farther than shouting. Our new celebrity. Professor, Harry said pleasantly. Snape let the silence sit for a moment, then began the introductory lecture with the particular menace of someone saving something for later. He called on Harry 3 times in the first 10 minutes, each question escalating in obscurity, Bezoar's aconite, the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane, and Harry answered each one correctly, not quickly or showily, but accurately because he'd read the book and it wasn't especially difficult. After the third question, Snape moved on. He didn't acknowledge the correct answers. He simply pivoted to discussing Neville Longbottom's cauldron with the specific precision of a surgeon who knows exactly where it will hurt most. Harry watched this and said nothing. He wrote down the potion instructions, helped Ron find the correct jar of boomslang skin in the supply cupboard, and at the end of class turned in a perfectly competent sample of his boil cure potion. Hermione caught up with him in the corridor afterward. You answered those questions right, she said with the tone of someone stating a fact they find intriguing. I read the textbook, Harry said. So did I. He didn't ask me anything. She paused. He was testing you. I know. And he didn't like that you knew the answers. I noticed. Harry glanced back at the dungeon door. He doesn't like me. He doesn't like a lot of people, Hermione said. But the way he doesn't like you is different. In what way? She thought about it. Most people he doesn't like, he just ignores or demeans you. He watched. She frowned. Like he was checking something. Harry filed that away too. He was building quite a collection. The defense against the dark arts classroom had a particular smell, herbicide, and something that might have been lavender overcompensating. Professor Quirrell stood at the front in his absurd purple turban and delivered the first lesson on the theory of dark creatures with the specific nervous energy of a man who needed very much to seem calm. He stuttered. He flinched at loud noises. He kept the turban very carefully faced forward. Harry sat 3 rows back and felt the warmth in his chest do something he hadn't experienced before. It contracted. Not painfully, more like the feeling of walking into a room where the temperature has dropped and your body adjusting, becoming more present, more alert, pulling in toward its own heat. He looked at Quirrell's turban. Something behind his scar pulsed twice, slowly like a second heartbeat. And for just a moment, just the span of a breath, he could see, not with his eyes, but with something deeper, 2 sources of life in the man at the front of the room. One guttering and dim, running on fear and something that had hollowed it out from the inside. And one that wasn't alive the way living things are alive but wasn't dead either. Something in between, something that pressed against the world from the wrong side. Harry blinked. The impression faded. But he kept watching Quirrell's back for the rest of the lesson with the quiet, patient attention of someone who has spotted something that doesn't belong and is not in any hurry to leave. After class in the corridor, Ron said, Did anyone else think that lesson was a bit rubbish? The theory was fine, Hermione said, already flipping through her notes. His delivery was inconsistent. He kept losing his train of thought. Seemed scared, Ron said. The bloke who teaches defense against the dark arts is scared of his own shadow. That's comforting. Harry said nothing. He was thinking about 2 heartbeats where there should have been 1, and about the warmth in his chest pulling inward, careful and alert, the way a flame narrows before a wind comes through. Thursday evening. Harry was in the common room at a table by the window, doing his transfiguration homework with Ron and Hermione, when the warmth behind his scar flared once, sharp and quick, like a struck match. He looked up from his parchment. The fire in the common room hearth, which had been burning low and orange, turned for just a second white, just white, clean as starlight, before settling back to orange and crackling on as if nothing had happened. Hermione, who missed nothing, had her quill frozen above her parchment. She was looking at the fireplace. Did that? She started. Yeah, Harry said. Ron was looking between them. What just happened? Harry picked up his quill and went back to his essay. He wrote 3 sentences about the principle of unexplainable transfigurative interaction before looking up and saying very quietly to both of them, Can I trust you with something? Ron put his quill down immediately. Hermione set hers down with slightly more deliberation, which somehow felt more serious. I've had something in me, Harry said. Since I can remember, I used to think it was just the accidental magic thing, the weird thing that happened when I was scared or angry, but it's not that. He held out his right hand, palm up, between them on the table and let the small flame appear, the same one he'd shown Hagrid. It sat in his palm and burned without burning, without heat, without smoke, without consuming anything, just fire being fire for the simple reason that it was. It was, he discovered, slightly larger than it used to be. Ron stared at it. His freckles were very pronounced when he was shocked, Harry had noticed. That's not a spell. That's not anything in any book I've seen, and I've seen Mum's whole library. She's got everything. No, Harry agreed, it's not a spell. Hermione was leaning forward, elbows on the table, studying the flame with an expression of intense professional interest that was somehow more respectful than awe. It doesn't burn you, she said. Number, does it burn other things? If I want it to. She looked up from the flame into his face. How long? Since before I could talk, I think. I was a baby and there was a lot of fire and he paused. I didn't get burned. I never get burned. The three of them sat with that for a moment. The fire in the hearth crackled. The common room murmured around them, homework and card games and an argument about Quidditch strategies taking up the middle distance. Right, Hermione said finally, with the tone of someone closing one chapter and opening another. I'm going to the library tomorrow and I'm not leaving until I find something. There are texts on magical theory that go back to the Founders' era. If this has ever happened before, someone wrote it down. And if no one wrote it down, Ron said. Hermione looked at Harry's flame. Then we're the first ones to figure it out, she paused, which would honestly be rather exciting. Harry closed his hand, the flame went out. Thank you, he said. He hadn't planned to say it, it came out with more weight than he'd intended. Ron shrugged with the specific casualness of someone who finds sincere gratitude slightly embarrassing and has decided the best response is to pretend the thanks was unnecessary. Mate, I watched a hat shout fire in the middle of the Great Hall on your behalf. We were already in this. Friday night, 2:47 in the morning by the clock on the dormitory wall. Harry sat up in bed. The other boys were sleeping. The castle was quiet in that specific way that very old buildings go quiet, not silent, but ancient, its breathing long and slow. He pushed back the curtain and sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. They were glowing again. Both of them this time faint and gold, and the glow ran up his arms and settled somewhere in the center of his chest like it was coming from there, from whatever lived behind his ribs and his scar and his lightning bolt of a history. He didn't fight it. He just sat with it, the way you sit with something you don't yet have the language for. The glow brightened for a moment, not dramatically, not explosively, but steadily like a dial being turned slowly. And in the light of it, Harry Potter sat in his first real bedroom in his first real school and understood, in the wordless way that the body sometimes understands things before the mind can articulate them, that whatever he was, it was not small. The universe had put something enormous inside an 11-year-old boy in a cupboard under the stairs, and the cupboard had not been large enough to contain it, and neither would anyone else be who made the mistake of thinking they could. He exhaled. The glow softened. The warmth settled. From the windowsill, a small bird that had been sitting there in the dark, not an owl, not anything native to Scotland, a bird that seemed to have been made purely of the colors of candlelight, ruffled its feathers once and disappeared between one blink and the next, leaving behind a single burnt gold feather that drifted down and landed across Harry's palm. He held it. It was warm. It hummed. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but it was not the sleeplessness of fear or worry. It was the sleeplessness of standing at the edge of something enormous and knowing that when you jumped, you would not fall, you would fly. Chapter 2, The Weight of Wings. The first week of classes established certain patterns. Hermione established herself as the person who had read everything and wasn't apologetic about it. Ron established himself as the person who hadn't read everything and also wasn't apologetic about it. Harry established himself as the person who made professors uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite articulate in staff meeting complaints. McGonagall watched him with the sharp attention of a woman who had taught 30 years of students and recognized, in the particular quality of Harry's focus, something that didn't fit her existing categories. She didn't say anything about it. She simply began setting him slightly harder problems than the rest of the class, with the brisk pragmatism of someone who believes the best response to extraordinary ability is extraordinary expectation. Flitwick beamed at him during charms with the specific delight of a small man who has encountered something bigger than himself and is entirely comfortable with that fact. Snape watched him like a debt he was calculating interest on. Quirrell watched him like a man watching a fire from a distance that he's not sure is safe. Harry watched Quirrell back. The library was Hermione's territory in the way that certain spaces become certain people's territory, not through claim but through frequency. By the end of the first week, she had a preferred table, a preferred chair, a system for cross-referencing that she'd explained to Harry once with the focused enthusiasm of someone describing a beloved machine. He'd listened carefully and retained all of it. They were there on Saturday morning, while Ron played Exploding Snap with the twins down in the common room, and Hermione had a stack of books that reached her chin. Okay, she said, pulling the first three toward her. I started with elemental magic theory, obviously, because fire is the most recorded element in wizarding history. There are entire subdisciplines around fiendfire and pyromantic divination and heat-based defensive casting, but none of that is what you're doing. She paused. What you're doing doesn't have a heat component. It doesn't burn me, Harry confirmed. It doesn't burn anything unless you want it to, she corrected. That's the key difference. Magical fire consumes. That's its fundamental nature. It's a transformation agent. It converts one thing into another. But what you produce doesn't consume. It just is. Which means it's not really fire in any standard magical definition. It's something that looks like fire and behaves like fire but is operating on completely different principles. She tapped the third book. I found a reference. Barely a paragraph in a text called Archaic Magical Phenomena and Prefoundational Metaphysics. It's from 1203, so the language is a bit impenetrable, but the gist is that certain sites of extraordinary magical convergence occasionally produce what the author calls a sempiternal flame. A fire that doesn't consume because it doesn't need fuel, because it is the fuel, because it exists as a kind of baseline cosmic energy. She looked up. A baseline cosmic energy, Harry said. I know how that sounds. No, he leaned forward. What does it say about where it comes from? Hermione's expression shifted into the specific territory she occupied when a piece of information was exciting her beyond what she considered appropriate. The author says it appears at sites of great life force convergence, battlefields, places of mass sacrifice, births. She paused. He uses the word phoenix once not as a creature but as a concept, as a principle. The principle of something that cannot die, that returns from death, that is the dying and the returning simultaneously. She looked at him steadily. Harry, your parents' house. A great life force convergence, Harry said quietly. One life sacrificed with complete and voluntary love and one life that died and she stopped. Didn't stay dead, Harry finished. They sat with that. Outside the library windows, the grounds were gray and damp and entirely ordinary. There's one more thing, Hermione said. She turned the book around and pushed it across the table. The text was dense and archaic, but she'd marked a single line with her finger. And the flame, once kindled in mortal flesh, is not a gift but a covenant. For the Force seeks always a vessel worthy of carrying what cannot be extinguished. And once chosen, the vessel is no longer merely vessel but participant in the oldest fire. Harry read it twice. Then he looked up. A covenant, he said. Not a gift, she said. A covenant, which means it's not something you have, it's something you're in. She folded her hands. I think whatever is inside you chose you because of what happened in Godric's Hollow. The magic your mother cast and the magic that rebounded and the fact that you came back, all of it created the conditions for something that has existed since before wizarding magic to find a home. She paused one more beat. I think you're carrying something very, very old, Harry. And very, very powerful, he said. That too, she admitted, though I suspect you already knew that, he had. But there was something different about knowing it alone in the dark and knowing it with someone else in the daylight. The second kind sat easier. Flying lessons were on Thursday. The whole Gryffindor first year came down to the pitch with the collective energy of children who had been promised something wonderful: brooms. Actual brooms. And Madame Hooch lined them up with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been running this exact lesson for 2 decades and had a very specific script. Harry stood between Ron and Hermione. The broom at his feet was school stock, slightly battered, with a tendency to pull left that he could feel even standing still with his hand above it. He called it up without particular effort, up, and it smacked into his palm with an enthusiasm the broom seemed to have been saving for years. He held it and felt through the wood the ambient magic of the pitch. 1,000 hours of Quidditch games, accumulated acceleration and altitude and competition baked into the grain. His palm tingled pleasantly. The warmth in his chest, quieter during lessons, as if it understood the concept of a low profile even when he didn't ask it to, pulsed once, familiarizing itself. Madame Hooch worked her way through the basics, mounting posture, the first controlled hover, and then said at a volume that carried to the far bleachers, "When I blow my whistle, kick off from the ground, rise to approximately 3 feet and then return. Exactly 3 feet. No higher." She blew the whistle. Harry kicked off. 3 feet he was up in level almost instantly. The broom responding to his balance with the same quality of rightness as his wand had. That sense of something meeting its proper context. And he held there, light and steady, 3 feet exactly, absolutely comfortable, and looked down the line at the other students wobbling and overcorrecting and performing the specific aerobatics of people on brooms for the first time. Then Madame Hooch moved to help Neville, and Draco Malfoy, 4 positions to Harry's left, caught the remembrall that Neville had dropped and kicked off hard, climbing rapidly above the permitted altitude with the specific expression of someone taking an opportunity. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco turned in the air. He was higher than Harry, trying for the psychological advantage of altitude, and he was grinning. "Want it back, Potter? Come and get it." He threw the remembrall hard, not at Harry but away, high and arcing toward the far end of the pitch, well away from any catcher. Harry watched it arc. He tilted the broom and went. He didn't think about it. That was the thing that he wouldn't be able to explain to Ron later, or to Hermione, who would ask with 12 follow-up questions. He simply went. Because the Remembrall was Neville's and Neville hadn't done anything wrong and some things were just that simple. The broom leapt under him like it had been waiting for the question, and the wind hit his face, and he climbed and turned and dove, and the Remembrall was falling now, spinning, and he was closing the gap at a rate that made Madame Hooch shout something behind him, and he came level with it with about 12 feet of air between him and the ground and caught it. The broom pulled up hard. Harry felt the force of it in his shoulders. 12 feet became 20 and then 40 as he circled back to altitude, Remembrall in his left hand, heart doing something that wasn't quite terror and wasn't quite exhilaration but lived in the exact territory between them. The warmth in his chest was singing. There was no better word for it, it was singing. He came to a hovering stop above the pitch, 40 feet up, looking down at 30 upturned faces, and the warmth sang, and he felt, without understanding quite what it meant yet, the air. Not just felt it the way you feel wind. Felt it the way you feel something that belongs to you. The thermals rising off the pitch, the cold current coming off the lake, the specific pressure of 40 feet of altitude against his clothes and hair and the broom beneath him. He came down, the pitch was very quiet. Madame Hooch had turned the color of chalk. She opened her mouth, clearly having many things to say about rule violations and recklessness. And then something in Harry's expression, or perhaps something in the air around him, the warmth that he didn't bother to suppress, the steady gold light that wasn't quite visible but was very nearly so, stopped her. She closed her mouth. Draco Malfoy, still hovering at his permitted altitude, was staring at Harry with an expression Harry hadn't seen on him before. Not the performance of disdain or the practiced sneer, something underneath those things, something that had edges. Harry held out the Remembrall toward Neville. "Yours," he said. Neville took it with both hands and said nothing. His face was very pink. From the front of the line, Ron Weasley said quietly, "Blimey." McGonagall found Harry before dinner, Potter. She materialized in the corridor with the specific teleportation ability of professors who knew the castle's shortcuts and fixed him with her sharpest look. "Come with me." He expected her office. She took him to the Quidditch pitch instead, where a tall boy with an angular jaw and the specific posture of a team captain was waiting with his arms crossed. "This," McGonagall said, "is Oliver Wood. He is the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Potter, I have not, in 30 years of teaching, seen natural flying like that. You have an ability that is," she paused, choosing the word with care, "unusual." Wood was nodding with the intensity of a man who has been given excellent news. "Seeker," he said immediately. "You'd be Seeker, Potter, youngest in a century. I'd need to get the pitch booked. We'd need to start training by Wood," McGonagall said, and he stopped. She looked at Harry. "You said nothing about the Remembrall." "No," Harry agreed. "You dove from 40 feet. Thereabouts." "Most first-years who do that fall," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "I didn't fall." McGonagall studied him for a long moment. The wind moved across the empty pitch between them. "No," she said. "You very much didn't." She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since his first transfiguration lesson, that cataloging attention slightly more complex than most teachers managed. "Is there anything I should know, Potter?" It was a remarkably open question from a woman who Harry suspected preferred very closed ones. He appreciated it. "Not yet," he said honestly, "but I'll tell you when there is." She held his gaze for another 3 seconds, then gave a single, precise nod, as if something had been agreed that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Practice starts Monday, 7 a.m. Wood's face split into a grin. "You won't regret it, Professor. He's going to be incredible." Harry, watching McGonagall walk back across the pitch, thought that incredible was probably the wrong word. But it was the closest word Wood had available, and he didn't correct it. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that stepped aside when you gave the right password, and the password that week was Sherbet Lemon, which Harry found slightly absurd for the most powerful wizard in Britain. He'd been summoned after breakfast on Friday by a note that said, "Please come at your convenience, Harry," which was polite enough that it made Harry slightly suspicious of the politeness. The office was circular and full of whirring silver instruments on spindly legs, doing the specific kinds of nothing that implied they were doing very important somethings. Portraits of old headmasters drowsed in their frames. Fawkes sat on his perch near the window, and when Harry came through the door, the Phoenix lifted his head and fixed Harry with one bright eye and made a sound, not his usual song but something quieter, more private. A sound like a single note held at the back of the throat. The warmth in Harry's chest answered it, a brief pulse, warm and resonant. "Harry," Dumbledore said from behind his desk. He was standing, which Harry noted. People stood to indicate the conversation mattered to them. "Thank you for coming. You asked me to." Harry looked around the room with comfortable attention and sat in the chair across the desk without waiting to be invited. He caught the slight shift in Dumbledore's expression, not displeasure but recalibration. "Nice office." Thank you, I've had years to accumulate things. Dumbledore sat, folding his hands, and looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses with the specific combination of warmth and measurement that seemed to be his default setting. Minerva tells me you had quite an impressive flying lesson. She tells me she wants me on the Quidditch team, Harry said. So presumably it went all right. It did more than go all right. Dumbledore's voice was gentle. Harry, I want to ask you something directly because I've found that directness when it's genuine tends to earn more than cleverness does. That's wise, Harry said. Okay. What do you feel when you fly? Harry considered him, not the question was easy. But the man asking it, the specific quality of attention behind those blue eyes, the careful way the question was constructed to sound personal when it was actually investigative. He appreciated the craftsmanship. He didn't resent it, he simply saw it. Honest answer, Harry said, please. Everything. He watched Dumbledore's face. The air, the altitude, the thermals, all of it. Like, he thought about how to say it without the language sounding bigger than the experience, like having very good hearing but for weather. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. And the fire your classmates have described. Which classmates? More than one have mentioned it. A warmth, a glow briefly during your dive. Dumbledore's voice stayed steady. Madame Hooch described it as she said she felt it more than saw it. Like standing near something very warm without seeing the source. She mentioned that, Harry said. She didn't mention it to you, Dumbledore said with a mild smile that was doing a second job as a calibration tool. Harry met his eyes. No, she didn't, but it happened, so I know about it. Another pause. Fawkes rustled on his perch. Dumbledore looked at the Phoenix with an expression Harry couldn't fully read, something complicated, something that had years in it. Harry, Dumbledore said, turning back. I believe there is something about your survival that goes beyond what I originally understood. The magic your mother cast was extraordinary, love as a literal magical shield, sacrificial protection of the highest order. But I confess that what I see in you now suggests the story is. He chose his words carefully, longer than that, more ancient. He leaned back. I want to understand it, I want to help you understand it. Harry looked at him. At the careful warmth, the managed openness, the vast accumulation of intelligence and experience and strategy behind a face deliberately arranged to invite trust. He thought about the letter Hagrid had sent, and the way Dumbledore had known about it immediately, and the way Quirrell flinched and gripped things when Harry was near, and the way Dumbledore had not yet mentioned Quirrell once. What do you already know? Harry asked. Beg your pardon. You already know something, more than what Madame Hooch told you. Harry kept his voice easy. You're not asking me what it is, you're asking me how I experience it, which is the question someone asks when they have a hypothesis and want to test it. So what's your hypothesis? The pause this time was different, longer. And when Dumbledore looked at him, the careful arrangement of his expression had shifted just slightly, just enough, into something more genuine, more startled. You're quite perceptive, he said. I've had to be, Harry said, not accusatory, just true. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, there are forces in this world older than wizarding magic, Harry. Things that predate wands and spells and even language. I have theories, yes, but theories about forces that old are, he paused, perilous to state with certainty. Because if you're wrong, you've named something you shouldn't have. Because if I'm right, Dumbledore said quietly, then the implications are very large. And I would not want to shape your understanding of yourself before you have the chance to find it naturally. Harry watched him. That was a real answer. Partial, guarded, but real. He appreciated it more than a performance of openness would have earned. Okay, Harry said, that's fair. For now, Dumbledore smiled, smaller this time, not the headmaster's smile but something more honest. For now, he agreed. Harry stood to leave. At the door he paused, turned. One thing, he said, yes, Quirrell watches me in class like he's scared of me. He kept his voice very level. He's scared of something to do with me, you might already know what that is. Dumbledore's face did not change, not a flicker. But his hands, folded on the desk, pressed slightly tighter together, barely perceptible, the kind of tell that only existed if you were watching the right place. I'll look into it, Dumbledore said. Thank you, Harry said and meant it, and left. On his perch, Fawkes watched Harry go with both bright eyes, and sang one low, long note into the space Harry left behind him. Saturday afternoon, and Harry was in the library again, alone this time in the restricted section. Not through any dramatic infiltration. He'd simply asked Madame Pince for access to the pre-foundational metaphysics text that Hermione had found, and Madame Pince had looked at him, and at the small quiet warmth that sat around him like an aura if you knew to look for it, and she'd said 15 minutes and unlocked the chain on the gate. Librarians, Harry was discovering, had their own relationship with the unusual that was less about rules and more about instinct. The book Hermione had found was Archaic Magical Phenomena and Pre-Foundational Metaphysics by Aldrich of Mercia, copied from an older manuscript, itself copied from something older still. It was held together by a binding that was more stubbornness than material, and it smelled like centuries. Harry set it on the table and opened it with the specific care of someone who has been told a thing might crumble. He read for an hour. The section Hermione had found was a starting point. 3 pages further on, Aldrich discussed what he called the animam ignis, the soul of fire, with a specificity that suggested he'd seen it, or something like it, himself. He wrote of a force that existed outside the boundaries of any single world's magic, that moved through creation like a tide, choosing hosts in moments of extraordinary sacrifice and extraordinary survival. He wrote that the host was always changed, not corrupted, not destroyed, but fundamentally reoriented, rebuilt around the fire the way a building is built around a hearth. He wrote that the force was not a gift from an external power. It was not granted. It was not borrowed. It was, Aldrich wrote, kindled, as if it had always existed in the vessel, dormant and waiting, and the right circumstances had simply struck the flint. Harry sat back and looked at the ceiling. Outside the restricted section gate, the library was its usual afternoon self, rustling pages, whispered voices, the particular hush of concentrated thought. A first year he didn't know was struggling with a stack of books near the periodicals. 2 Ravenclaws were arguing in hushed tones about something they'd both clearly read wrong. Everything ordinary, everything normal. And Harry Potter, sitting in a library in Scotland, 11 years old, reading an 800-year-old manuscript about a cosmic force that had chosen him before he could walk, felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, warm and steady like a second opinion. Kindled, he thought, not given, not imposed, revealed. Quidditch practice was Monday morning, gray and cold, the pitch silver with early frost that crunched under Harry's trainers as he walked down from the castle. He was the only first year. The rest of the team were older Wood, 2 beaters named Fred and George Weasley who he'd met through Ron and who immediately treated him with the specific affection of people who recognize a kindred chaos, and 3 chasers who assessed him professionally and then went back to warm-up drills. Wood briefed him on the snitch. Harry had read about it already but let Wood explain without interrupting, because Wood's explanation had an emotional depth to it that the textbook lacked. He spoke about the snitch the way some people spoke about music, with a reverence that was entirely genuine. They mounted and Wood released the practice snitch, a slow training one that Fred told him was about as fast as your gran on a Saturday morning, and Harry spotted it in 37 seconds. He caught it in 8. Wood stared at the small golden ball fluttering in Harry's closed fist. Then he looked at Harry, then at the ball again. Again, he said, 3 more times. The average was 42 seconds to spot and 9 to catch. Fred and George were sitting on their brooms eating the sandwiches they'd apparently brought up from the kitchen, watching with the pleased expressions of people at a very good sporting event. "What were your times before me?" Harry asked. "Angelina's best spot time is 3 minutes, Wood said. He sounded slightly dazed. "Best catch time was 40 seconds. That was me first year and I was considered exceptional." Harry turned the practice snitch over in his fingers. It tickled. "I can feel it," he said. "When it moves, the displacement in the air." He thought about how to say it. "It's like when something moves very fast, it leaves a shape in the air behind it. I can feel the shape." Fred and George exchanged a look above their sandwiches. "Mate," George said, "that is either the most extraordinary thing or the most terrifying thing I've ever heard." "Can be both," Harry said. George pointed at him. "I like this one." It was the second practice the following Thursday where things got complicated, full team practice. The whole pitch was in use. All 3 chasers running patterns, the beaters working drills, Wood behind the goalposts barking instructions that blended into the wind, and Harry circling high above all of it, watching, looking for the snitch with the specific quality of attention that wasn't quite sight. The snitch was near the east goalpost. He could feel it, the tiny, precise displacement, the faint golden shimmer at the edge of perception. He started toward it. And then the broom bucked. Not the natural pull-left characteristic he'd accounted for. Something else, a shudder that ran through the handle like electricity, and then another, and the broom nosed down hard enough to pitch him forward, his hands tight on the handle, stomach lurching as the pitch rose to meet him. The warmth in his chest leapt. Not in alarm, in awareness. The same contraction he'd felt in Quirrell's classroom, the pulling inward, the heightened presence. He corrected hard, pulling the nose up, fighting something that wasn't mechanical fault and wasn't weather but felt underneath like intention. Like fingers. His scar blazed, not green. Gold, fierce, bright gold, the color of the fire in his palm, and he felt through the golden heat 2 things simultaneously, the broom shuddering beneath him and somewhere below on the ground in the stands a presence. Cold and purposeful, pressing, he looked down. The stands were mostly empty. A few spectators, second years, a Hufflepuff with a scarf, and at the near end, half in shadow under the covered section, Quirrell, in his turban, watching the sky, watching Harry. The broom bucked again, hard enough to nearly throw him, and Harry made a decision in about half a second that was less a decision and more a reflex. He didn't fight the broom toward the ground, he didn't call for help, he didn't panic. He flew directly at Quirrell. He came off the height like a dive, like the remembrall catch, but with intention behind it this time, deliberate and fast and entirely committed. The warmth in his chest surged outward as he dove, and he felt it in the air around him. Heat. Not burning heat, but presence heat. The specific warmth of something old and vast waking up to pay attention. His hair was burning gold at the tips, and he didn't know it and wouldn't have cared. Quirrell looked up, saw him coming. Harry watched the man's face do several things very quickly, surprise, then recognition, then something that was underneath Quirrell's face rather than on it, something colder and older and more afraid than Quirrell himself was. The jinx on the broom broke the moment Quirrell broke eye contact, stumbling backward into the covered stands with his turban slightly crooked, his hands pressed to his face, and Harry pulled the broom up hard 20 feet above the stands and circled once, looking down at the Dada professor picking himself up from a bench with shaking hands. Harry landed at the edge of the pitch. Wood was coming toward him at pace, the rest of the team circling worriedly overhead. "Harry, what was your broom was?" "The broom was being interfered with," Harry said. His voice was steady. The warmth in his chest was still elevated, still bright, slowly settling back toward its resting state. From the stands, someone was jinxing it. Jinxing who? Wood? Wood looked toward the stands. Quirrell had gone. "You dove at the stands." "At the source," Harry said. "It stopped when I did." He looked up at the empty space where Quirrell had been. "It stops when it can't hold focus." Wood stared at him. Fred and George landed next to them, and Fred said quietly, "You flew at the bloke who was jinxing you." "Seemed efficient," Harry said. George grabbed Fred's arm. "I want it on the record," he said solemnly, "that we have been waiting our entire Hogwarts career for a teammate who would do something like that." Wood rubbed his face with both hands. "You're going to give me a heart attack before Christmas," he said. "You know that." "You'll be fine," Harry said. "The broom's fine too, by the way. Check if you want, but it's clean now." He walked back across the pitch toward the castle with the specific unhurried calm of someone who has handled a thing and is moving on to the next thing. And above him, very high, a bird made entirely of light made one slow circle against the gray Scottish sky before dissolving into the clouds. That evening, Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat in the corner of the common room, and Harry told them what had happened. Ron's face went through approximately 9 distinct expressions in 4 seconds. He settled on outrage. "He jinxed your broom during practice, in front of people." "He thought no one would know it was him," Hermione said. She was pale but thinking fast. Harry could see her assembling something, the way she assembled things when the information had weight to it. "If a broom fails mid-flight and the rider falls, there's no evidence. It looks like an equipment fault." She looked at Harry. "He didn't account for you being able to fly back to him." "He didn't account for a lot of things," Harry said. "Harry," Ron leaned forward, "that's a professor. You dove at a professor." "He tried to kill me," Harry said with the same ease he'd say it's raining. "I know, but..." Ron stopped. "Actually, fair point. He's not trying to kill you for his own reasons," Hermione said, and her voice had gone very quiet. "It's got something to do with what we talked about in the library, with whatever's in this school that's very carefully guarded." She glanced around the common room, lowered her voice further. "I've been looking into the 3rd-floor corridor." "Dumbledore said it was out of bounds," Ron said. "Dumbledore said it was out of bounds for those who didn't want to die a very painful death," Hermione said precisely. "Which tells you 2 things, that there's something dangerous there, and that someone thought the appropriate response was to tell first-years rather than simply not mentioning it." She paused. "Which means he wanted us to know it existed." Harry looked at her. "Why would he want first-years to know a dangerous thing existed?" Hermione met his eyes. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think the answer is in there, and I think Quirrell is trying to get to it, and I think..." She stopped, restarted. "Harry, I think Quirrell might not be entirely himself." "No," Harry agreed, "he's not." Ron looked between them. "Right," he said, with the specific tone of someone deciding to accept the scenario as given and focus on practical matters. "So what do we do about it?" Harry picked up his charms homework and looked at the first question. "We find out what's on the 3rd floor," he said. "We find out what it is and why it's being guarded and what Quirrell wants with it." He wrote the first answer. "And we do it before he figures out another way to get to it." "And if he tries the broom thing again?" Ron said. Harry glanced up. "He won't," he said simply. "He knows I know it changes the game." "How are you so calm about this?" Ron asked, not accusatory, genuinely wondering. Harry thought about the question honestly. About the cupboard under the stairs and 11 years of being afraid and the warmth in his chest that had been there the entire time, quiet and patient, waiting for him to stop apologizing for it. About the sorting hat saying fire in a voice that wasn't its own. About Ollivander's candles. "I think I've been afraid my whole life," he said, "of things that were smaller than me, and now I'm not afraid," which feels like the same thing but it isn't. He went back to his homework. "Whatever Quirrell's carrying, whatever is in his turban, it's afraid of me, not the other way around." Ron stared at him, then he picked up his own homework. Right, he said. Okay then. Hermione said nothing, but Harry caught the look on her face, not fear, not wonder, but something precise and serious and deeply engaged. The look of someone who has committed to a problem and intends to solve it. Outside the common room window, the Scottish night was very dark and very large, and the warmth in Harry's chest burned steady as a fixed star. Chapter 3. Fire and Frost. The troll's smell reached them before the screaming did. It was Halloween, which meant the Great Hall had been decorated with 1,000 live bats and carved pumpkins the size of small cars. And the feast was extraordinary in the way that Hogwarts feasts generally were: excessive, warm, and accompanied by the specific ambient happiness of several hundred children who had been promised sugar and delivered. Harry was eating and listening to Ron describe the Chudley Cannons last season with the focused grief of a true fan when Professor Quirrell burst through the doors. His turban was crooked. It was always slightly crooked lately, Harry had noticed, as if whatever was underneath it had grown restless, as if keeping it contained required an effort that was beginning to show. His face was the color of old cheese, and he grabbed the doorframe and shouted with a dramatic timing that felt slightly rehearsed, "Troll in the dungeons, thought you ought to know," and then crumpled to the floor in what might have been a faint. The hall erupted. McGonagall's voice cut through it like a blade. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." And the controlled chaos of 400 students all trying to move in different directions at once began. Harry sat very still for exactly 3 seconds. He felt the troll before he saw it, or not the troll specifically, but the wrongness of something large and stupid and violent moving through the castle's stone corridors, carrying the specific heavy disruption of something that didn't belong here. A blunt pressure against the background hum of the building's ambient magic, the way a stone dropped in still water creates a radius of disturbance. He also felt underneath that the dim guttering life flame of Hermione Granger, somewhere in the East Wing, separated from the rest of Gryffindor, not moving toward safety. He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand. "Harry," Ron started. "Hermione's not here," Harry said. He was already moving against the current of the crowd toward the door. Ron was beside him in about 2 seconds flat because Ron Weasley's defining characteristic, underneath the freckles and the Quidditch opinions and the very specific sense of humor, was that when things went sideways he moved toward them rather than away, and this had been true of him since he was old enough to follow his brothers anywhere they'd take him. "She went to the bathroom during dinner," Ron said, keeping pace. "East side, ground floor." "I know. How do you know?" Harry didn't answer, because explaining that he could feel the dim warmth of her aliveness somewhere in the stone bones of the castle was a conversation for a time when they weren't moving fast through a corridor full of retreating students, following the specific pressure of something large and wrong. The troll was in the East Wing. They heard it before the corridor opened up, a grinding, rolling sound like a boulder learning to walk, accompanied by the percussive destruction of a creature that perceived obstacles as personal affronts and responded accordingly. A suit of armor went past them in pieces. The wall to their left had a new hole in it, roughly troll-shaped, dust still falling from the edges. There, Ron said, the bathroom door, closed, and the troll, standing in the middle of the corridor between them and it, 12 feet of gray-green muscle and malice, currently attempting to pull a torch bracket off the wall because it had looked at the torch bracket wrong. Harry assessed the situation in about 4 seconds. The troll was big, obviously. But big was not the same as dangerous if you understood how it worked. And Harry understood, with the particular awareness that had been growing in him for months, that the troll had almost no internal fire. There was life in it, dim and slow, like an ember buried under ash, but there was no mind behind the life, no intelligence, no capacity for strategy. It was a force of nature in the same way that an avalanche was a force of nature, impressive, destructive, and entirely predictable if you knew what it was looking for. "Ron," Harry said, "get the door open, get Hermione out." "And you?" Harry looked at the troll. The warmth in his chest was very calm. Calmer than he'd expected, not the contracting alertness of Quirrell's presence, but something simpler, steadier, almost amused, the way a lit match feels about darkness. "I'll be fine," he said. "Harry, Ron, door." Ron went for the door, moving wide around the troll, low and fast, the way someone moves when they've grown up with 6 brothers and learned early that the best way past something big was always the unexpected angle. The troll's attention was on the torch bracket. It hadn't seen them yet. Harry walked straight toward it. He didn't run, didn't sneak. He walked with the specific unhurried directness of someone who has decided that the situation calls for presence rather than speed, and the warmth in his chest built with each step, not to a surge, not to an explosion, but to a steady, full, resonant heat, the kind that comes from something burning at its proper capacity rather than being held back. The troll turned when Harry was about 15 feet away, small red eyes. club the size of a small tree. It looked at him the way trolls looked at most things, with the blunt, automatic aggression of a thing that perceived everything smaller than itself as either a threat to be eliminated or an obstacle to be cleared. It raised the club. Harry raised his right hand. The fire that came was not the small marble-sized flame from the common room table. It was not theatrical or decorative. It came from his palm the way light comes from a lamp when you finally flip the switch, full, immediate, purposeful, a column of golden white fire, the same clean color as his scar when it blazed at night, the color of the candles in Ollivander's shop when his wand had hummed its first note. It hit the club and the club ceased to exist as a club and became briefly a very interesting thermodynamic event and then became ash. The troll stared at the stub of charred wood in its hand. Harry walked another 3 feet closer and looked up at it. "Leave," he said. The troll, and this was the thing Harry could never quite explain afterward, not to Ron or Hermione or anyone else who asked, whimpered. 12 feet of troll, the kind of creature that had once cornered Herpo the Foul and required an army of Aurors to subdue, made a sound like a very large frightened dog, dropped the stub of its club and backed down the corridor with a speed that suggested it had found a prior engagement. It rounded the corner. Gone. The corridor was silent except for settling plaster and the distant sound of the castle going about its business. Behind Harry, the bathroom door opened. Hermione came out pale but standing straight and looked at the ash on the floor and the scorch mark on the ceiling and then at Harry with an expression that had moved past shock into the specific territory she occupied when she was processing something large. Ron appeared behind her, slightly out of breath. "That was," he started. "Fast," Harry said. He turned. The warmth was already settling back to its resting state, easy as breathing. "You all right?" "Yes," Hermione said. She looked at the ash again. "You disintegrated the club. It seemed the quickest approach. What did you say to it?" "To leave." She stared at him, and it did. Eventually, Harry looked down the corridor. The castle was quiet in the specific way it went quiet after something dramatic, a held breath before normalcy resumed. "We should get back before the professors find us here." "They're going to find us here anyway," Ron said. "The hallway looks like a quarry had an argument with itself." "True." Harry looked at both of them. "Thank you for coming," he said. He meant it for Ron specifically, for the immediate no questions asked movement when Harry had said go. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, well." Ron kicked a piece of rubble. "You were going to do something mental regardless, so." Hermione was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Harry." "Ire?" She was looking at his hand, his right hand, which was entirely unmarked, entirely unburned, entirely fine. "It came from you, not from a wand, not from a spell." "No," he agreed, "without incantation, without a focus of any kind." She was building to something, he could feel it in the quality of her attention. The theoretical literature on wandless magic suggests it requires years of discipline and a specific kind of emotional state, usually anger or fear or extreme stress. She paused. "You didn't look stressed." "I wasn't." "What were you?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Present," he said. "It's easier when I'm just here. When I stop trying to measure it or control it and just let it be what it is." Hermione looked at him for a long moment with an expression that lived between professional fascination and something more personal. "That," she said finally, "is going to require a very long conversation." "Tomorrow," Harry said, because down the corridor the sound of rapid professor footsteps was getting louder. McGonagall found them. McGonagall always found people. Harry suspected she had some arrangement with the castle itself. A running information exchange, like a building with a favorite faculty member. She swept around the corner with Snape and Quirrell in her wake and stopped dead at the condition of the hallway. Her eyes went from the ash to the scorch mark to the three of them, standing in a loose triangle untouched. "What?" she said in the specific tone of someone who has decided that whatever the answer is, she is going to need several minutes before she can respond to it appropriately. "Happened here." "Troll," Harry said. "It's gone. It went left at the intersection." McGonagall looked at the ash. The ash was generous evidence for a troll's recent presence. "This," she gestured at it, "this is not what trolls leave behind." "No," Harry agreed. "The troll is fine though. Structurally, I just encouraged it to leave." McGonagall stared at him with both eyes at once in a way she rarely did. Usually one of her eyes was doing assessment work and the other was being skeptical. But right now they were unified in something Harry thought might be the McGonagall equivalent of a dropped jaw. Behind her, Snape was looking at Harry with his characteristic surgical attention, and Harry looked back at him, and for a moment something passed between them that wasn't warmth but wasn't hostility either, more like mutual acknowledgement. Two people who both knew more than they were saying, briefly recognizing each other's awareness. Quirrell was looking at the ash. His face was doing that thing again, the two-layer thing, the guttering light over the cold dark, and his hands pressed together in front of him were very slightly trembling. The warmth in Harry's chest pulsed, not aggressively, just noting things, filing things away. You three will receive 5 points each, McGonagall said, arriving at a decision with the efficiency of someone who needed to deal with the structural damage before the philosophical implications. And 5 points will be taken each for being out of your dormitory during a castle emergency. She fixed all three of them with a look that suggested the net zero was more about the symbolism of the taking than any genuine sense that 5 points was relevant to anything. Go to your common room. Now, they went. In the corridor behind them, Harry heard McGonagall say to Snape in a voice she clearly thought was too low to carry, "That scorch mark is 6 feet wide, Severus." And Snape very quietly, "I know." November rolled into the castle like a houseguest who planned to stay. Rain became a permanent atmospheric condition. The grounds went from damp to saturated. The lake, already dark, became something that light simply declined to visit. Harry didn't mind. He liked the gray days. There was something honest about them, no pretense of warmth, just weather being exactly what it was. He spent the extra common room time productively. Hermione had found 2 more texts that added dimension to Aldrich's account of the Animam Ignes. One a fragmentary manuscript from the 3rd century that called it by a different name, the eternal fire, the ever-living flame, and described its host as someone who stood between the living and the dead, who could sense the life force of everything around them, who burned without being consumed because they were already the burning. Cosmic awareness, Hermione said, on a rainy Tuesday in the library, pushing the manuscript toward him. The text describes it as seeing what the author calls the vidi scintilla, the life spark in every living thing. She looked at him intently. "Can you do that?" "Sometimes," Harry said. "I didn't know that's what it was called." What triggers it? He thought about it carefully. When I'm paying the right kind of attention, it's not I can't just switch it on. But if I'm very present, very focused, sometimes I can feel I don't know how to describe it other than aliveness of things. The specific quality of something being alive versus something not being. He paused. "I felt you in the East Corridor on Halloween. I couldn't see you, but I felt that you were there." Hermione was very still. "And I can feel when it's wrong," he continued. "When something is alive but the quality of the aliveness is off." Quirrell. He met her eyes. "There are 2 distinct things in him. One is him, faint, scared, running on fumes. The other is something else. Something that used to be alive the normal way but isn't anymore. Something that has twisted the shape of living into a shape that persists without any of the qualities that make living what it is." "Voldemort," Hermione said. She said it quietly, but she said it, and Harry appreciated that she didn't flinch from the name. "Something that's trying to be Voldemort," Harry said. "It's not all of him. It's a fragment, it's cold and purposeful, and it hates me specifically, not the way people hate people. More like," he searched for the right analogy, "the way an infection hates the immune system, not personally, systematically." Ron, who had been listening with his elbow on the table and his chin in his hand, said, "So Quirrell has a Dark Lord living in his head and the Dark Lord is scared of you." "Scared and determined," Harry said. "It's still trying to get what it needs. Whatever's on the 3rd floor." "Which brings us back to that," Hermione said. She pulled her notes toward her. For 3 weeks she'd been working on the 3rd floor question with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that ignorance was the enemy and knowledge was the only acceptable response. "I've been looking at Hogwarts property records. There's a wing in the library that deals with acquisitions, objects brought in for storage or safekeeping. There's a gap in the records. Several months ago, a large item was transported from Gringotts Vault 713 to Hogwarts." She looked up. "I know this because Hagrid took Harry to Gringotts and visited Vault 713, and it was empty." Harry sat up slightly. He remembered Hagrid's nervousness that day. The small grubby package wrapped in brown paper, just Hogwarts business, Hagrid had said. "Whatever Hagrid picked up from that vault," Hermione said, "is in this school, and Quirrell or whatever's using Quirrell wants it badly enough to try to kill the one person in the building most likely to stop him from getting it." Ron looked at Harry. "Brilliant. So whatever the most dangerous thing in Gringotts was, it's now down the hall. 3 floors up technically," Harry said. "That's worse," Ron said. "We need to know what it is," Hermione said. "Not to get it, not to interfere, but because if we don't know, we can't anticipate what Quirrell will do next." She looked at Harry. "You're the one he's afraid of. That means he needs to deal with you before he can get to it. Which means, he'll try again," Harry said. "Something that isn't as obvious as a jinxed broom." He thought about the cold, purposeful quality of the thing inside Quirrell. It's systematic rather than personal hatred, it's patient calculation. "He'll try to get me out of the way first." "Can he?" Ron said, not doubtfully, just asking. Harry picked up his quill. "No," he said, and went back to his charms essay. The first Quidditch match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, the second Saturday in November, and the entire castle seemed to have decided to attend on the strength of collective anticipation. The stands were packed, flags waving, and the pre-match noise had a specific quality, louder than usual, with a higher-pitched undertone that suggested that the rumor about the first-year seeker had circulated thoroughly. Harry walked out onto the pitch with the team and felt the crowd the way he felt weather as a condition of the environment noted and set aside. He had his broom, his gloves, his seeker's focus, and the warmth in his chest at its typical calm resting state. He'd checked his broom himself that morning, running his hands along the handle and the twigs with the specific attention he'd developed for sensing interference. And it was clean. He'd also checked the stands early, looking for Quirrell's turban, found it in the upper east section, wedged between two seventh years. He'd noted the position and filed it away. Madam Hooch blew the whistle. 14 brooms went up. The match was, to Harry's experience of it, something like being inside a very fast piece of music. The chasers worked patterns below him. The bludgers moved through the air like punctuation in a sentence being written at speed. Wood's voice reached him in fragments. Good, hold your line, watch the bludger, and through all of it Harry circled at altitude. One layer of his attention on the play below and the rest of it cast wide, feeling for the snitch. It was on the far side of the pitch, low, moving along the boundary line near the Slytherin stands. He felt it before he saw it, the tiny, precise displacement, the faint golden shimmer in the air, and turned his broom without hurrying, beginning the long diagonal descent that would intersect with its trajectory. The Slytherin seeker, a fourth-year named Higgs who was competent and quick, spotted Harry's movement and followed, reading the direction correctly. He was fast. He came at the snitch from the other side, closing the angle. Harry didn't accelerate. He adjusted his angle instead, came at the snitch on a steeper descent, cutting inside Higgs's approach. And for 15 seconds they were both dropping fast toward the boundary line with the snitch between them, and the crowd had gone from loud to very loud to the specific single-note roar of everyone making the same sound at once. The warmth in Harry's chest was singing. He could feel the snitch, not just its position but its momentum, the tiny golden certainty of its next movement, the way it would juke left in approximately half a second when it sensed the approaching hands. He moved before it moved. His hand was already where it was going to be. His fingers closed around warm metal and the world was very loud. The match had lasted 11 minutes. He came to a hover above the pitch, the snitch fluttering between his thumb and forefinger, and looked down at the team below him, Wood with both fists in the air, Fred and George doing something aerobatic and dangerous nearby, the three chasers in a complicated, joyful collision. He looked up at the stands, at the Gryffindor section, which was doing something that resembled a controlled riot. He looked at the East section. Quirrell was standing still in the middle of the celebration, not cheering, not moving, looking at Harry. Harry held his gaze for a moment. The warmth in his chest was steady and calm and warm and patient, and he let Quirrell see it, let whatever was behind Quirrell's eyes register that the one person between it and what it wanted had just caught a snitch in 11 minutes without breaking a sweat and wasn't afraid of being watched. Then Harry descended to the pitch and let his teammates crash into him with the specific chaos of victory. The conversation happened 3 nights after the Quidditch match, in the empty Transfiguration classroom at 10 past 10, which was past curfew, but the warmth in Harry's chest had given him what he was coming to think of as the castle's own version of an early warning system. He could feel the patrol patterns of the prefects through the ambient life warmth of the building, the specific moving signatures of people he'd learned to recognize. He'd been coming here to practice, alone, in the evenings when the castle settled. Not wand work, he didn't need a wand for most of what he was learning to do, and the wand felt less like a tool and more like a conversation, something he used for precision and nuance rather than fundamental power. He came here to listen. To sit in the empty room and open up the awareness fully, let the warmth expand outward through the stone and wood and sense the living signatures of the castle. The students sleeping in their towers, the professors in their offices and common rooms, the creatures in the grounds, the specific coldandrong of whatever inhabited the third-floor corridor. He was sitting cross-legged on a desk, eyes closed, doing exactly this when the door opened and Ron slipped in, followed by Hermione. "Thought you might be here," Ron said, pulling a chair backward and sitting on it like it was a horse. "How?" Harry asked. "You weren't in the dormitory and Hermione worked it out because you'd been coming back smelling like stone dust." Harry looked at Hermione. She shrugged without apology. "We want to come," she said, "whatever you're doing here." "I'm mostly just sitting," Harry said. "Then we'll mostly just sit with you." She pulled a chair and sat in it properly, notebook on her knee, quill already out. She was ready for information, which was Hermione's version of emotional support. "Tell us what you sense, talk us through it." Harry looked at both of them in the dim classroom, Ron with his elbows on the chair back, entirely comfortable with the weirdness of the situation, and Hermione with her notebook, determined to categorize the uncategorizable. He felt a specific warmth that had nothing to do with the Phoenix Force and everything to do with the fact that these two people had, in about 6 weeks, become the first friends he'd ever had who showed up after they knew what he was. All right, he said. He closed his eyes again. Give me a minute. He let the awareness expand. The castle in the dark, breathing its slow stone breath, the sleeping and the wakeful. The warm signatures of people scattered through the towers, a few still awake, distinct as candles. The grounds beyond the walls, cool and wild, the forbidden forest dense with life of various kinds, tangled and complex and old. And on the third floor, there's something in the corridor, he said. He felt both of them go still. It's not Quirrell, it's something guarding, I can feel it, but it's not like human life. More like several somethings layered. One of them is very large and it has three, he stopped. 3 life centers, 3 distinct fires in one body. He opened his eyes. Does that mean anything to you? Hermione's quill had gone still, her eyes were wide. 3 fires in one body, she said. A 3-headed dog, she said. Hagrid told us about his dog Fluffy last September. I thought it was a pet, but that's absurd. A Cerberus on the 3rd floor would be, that's extraordinary, that's a creature that shouldn't even, she stopped herself, reorganized. What's under it? Harry closed his eyes again, pressed his awareness down through the floor deeper. Past the life of the dogs, vast and warm and triple-cored into what lay beneath it. There was something. Not alive, not in any biological sense, but potent, radiating a kind of energy that registered in Harry's awareness not as warmth but as fullness. A concentrated aliveness, the way a single seed is alive with the potential of an entire forest. Dense and ancient and humming faintly with the specific resonance of something that had been keeping its own counsel for a very long time. The thing in his chest, the Phoenix Force, as Aldrich had named it, the animam ignes, resonated with it. Not matching it, not merging, more like recognition, 2 very old things aware of each other across the space between them. He opened his eyes. I don't know what it is, he said, but it's extraordinary. It feels like, he struggled for language, like a very old distillation of something, like the idea of life compressed into a physical object. He looked at Hermione. What's the most valuable thing a wizard could possibly want, not for power, not as a weapon, but as a principle? Hermione's expression went very carefully neutral in a way that meant she'd arrived somewhere significant. The Philosopher's Stone, she said quietly. Nicola's Flamel, the stone produces the elixir of life. She paused. Eternal life, Ron said very slowly. Voldemort wants eternal life. He already has a version of it, Harry said. Or he thinks he does. He thought about the cold fragment inside Quirrell, the thing that was a piece of something that had once been entirely, terribly alive. But it's not working the way he planned. It's not life, it's persistence, the way a stain persists after you've cleaned the cloth. He looked at the window at the dark and rain. He wants the real thing. And the stone is the real thing, Hermione said. The stone is the real thing, Harry agreed. The 3 of them sat with this for a moment. The rain hit the windows in irregular rhythm. Somewhere in the castle, distantly, a clock struck 11. Right, Ron said eventually. So, we have a fragment of Voldemort inside our defense against the dark arts teacher, trying to get past a 3-headed dog to steal an immortality stone so he can come back from being whatever he currently is. He looked at Harry. And you're the one thing standing between him and it. Apparently, Harry said. Great, Ron said. Brilliant, fantastic, that's a perfectly normal first term. Harry looked at him, and something loosened in his chest, not the Phoenix Force, just the ordinary human part of him, the part that had spent 11 years unable to share anything with anyone and was still getting used to the novelty of people who stayed. He smiled. It was a real smile, not the polite, careful thing he'd learned to use for teachers and strangers, but the genuine article. Thanks for being here, he said. Ron made the face he made when he found sincere expressions mildly alarming. Yeah, well, he said, someone's got to keep track of how many times you do something impossible. I'm keeping a tally. You're at 7. 7, the broom thing counts twice, Ron said firmly. The flying at Quirrell and then the fact that he let you land. Hermione was writing in her notebook. She didn't look up. You're both absurd, she said, with the specific warmth of someone who was very pleased about this. 3 days later, Harry woke at 4 in the morning with the warmth in his chest blazing and his scar burning gold and the absolute certainty that Quirrell was moving. Not in his bedroom, in the castle, below, moving with purpose. Harry sat up, reached for his glasses, and in the same motion reached for his wand on the nightstand. He sat still for 30 seconds, eyes closed, awareness expanded outward through the stone floors like roots through soil. The guttering double signature of Quirrell, faint human light and cold purposeful dark, was on the 3rd floor, standing outside the door. Harry got up. He didn't wake Ron because Ron needed sleep, and because this wasn't the moment, this was reconnaissance, not confrontation. He put on his trainers and his robe, and he moved into the corridor and down the stairs with the specific silent efficiency of someone who has learned to move quietly out of long domestic necessity. He was on the 2nd floor when he heard it, the door opening. Then a sound he'd never heard before, vast and low, a grinding growl that seemed to resonate in the bones of the building itself. Then Quirrell's voice, high and frightened, calm, 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 then silence, then footsteps running, coming downward. Harry stepped into an alcove. Quirrell came past him at something close to a sprint, his robes disordered, his turban even more sideways than usual, his face pale and sheened with sweat. He ran past without seeing Harry down the stairs toward the first floor toward the dungeons and his office. Harry stepped out of the alcove. The third-floor corridor was quiet again. Behind the door, something breathed in a deep triple rhythm, settling back into its patient waiting. Harry stood in the corridor at 4 in the morning and looked at the door. Whatever was in there was protecting something that Quirrell had now confirmed. He wanted badly enough to risk a three-headed dog. The timing had started to feel real, the way distant threats become real when they start moving. He turned and walked back toward Gryffindor Tower. He needed to think. He needed to figure out not just what the stone was, but what came after the stone, what Quirrell's plan actually required, what steps followed getting past the dog, what Dumbledore's actual configuration of protections included and why. And whether the headmaster was going to be part of the solution, or whether Harry was going to be solving this in the specific way he'd been solving most things at Hogwarts so far. Efficiently, independently, and in a way that would probably make McGonagall need a sit-down. He reached the fat lady's portrait, gave the password, climbed through. The common room was empty, firelight low, the room breathing its slow nighttime breath. He sat down in the chair closest to the fire and looked at the coals and thought. The fire in the grate watched him back. After a while he held out his right hand and let his flame come, the small, perfect golden-white flame, the one that didn't consume, the one that was, as Aldrich of Mercia had written 800 years ago, not a gift but a covenant. It sat in his palm and burned, and he looked at it and felt in its light with absolute clarity that what was coming was not something to prepare for or dread or strategize against. It was something to meet. He closed his hand, went to bed, slept well. Chapter 4, What Lives in the Dark. December arrived the way it always did at Hogwarts, suddenly as if the castle had been waiting for permission. One morning the grounds were wet and gray, and the next they were white and still. Snow settled over everything with the specific hush of a world deciding to be quiet for a while. The lake went opaque. The forbidden forest turned into something from a woodcut, all dark lines against white sky. Harry stood at the dormitory window at 6 a.m. and watched it and felt the cold through the glass and thought about fire. He'd been doing that more, thinking about the nature of it. Not his fire specifically, but fire as a principle. What it meant that something could exist in a permanent state of transformation, always burning, never the same twice, never diminishing. There was a philosophy in it that Aldrich had only gestured toward and Harry kept finding himself returning to, the way you return to a sentence in a book that meant something you couldn't quite articulate. The Phoenix Force wasn't power the way a spell was power, contained, directed, measurable. It was power the way weather was power, the way gravity was power. It didn't care whether you pointed it at the right thing. It was simply there, and you either learned to live inside it or you didn't. He was learning. The restricted section visit happened on a Wednesday in the gap between lunch and afternoon classes, and this time it wasn't reconnaissance, it was targeted. Hermione had found a reference in a general theoretical index to a text called The Persistence of Vital Essence by a medieval alchemist named Margrave, which apparently contained the most detailed non-flammable account of what the Philosopher's Stone actually did at a metaphysical level. Not the chemistry of the elixir, the philosophy of the stone itself. Madame Pince let them in again, with slightly less hesitation than last time and a look at Harry that suggested she was recategorizing him in real time. The book was in the far back corner, between two texts that smelled strongly of something Harry didn't want to identify. He found it by the specific resonance it had against his awareness, not a life resonance but something adjacent to it, a kind of potential energy hum, the same quality as the object beneath the third-floor corridor but diluted through the medium of description and symbol rather than presence. He read. Hermione read beside him. Ron sat on a footstool and ate an apple he'd brought from lunch with the patient boredom of someone who has accepted that his role in this particular operation was ambient moral support. Margrave wrote about the stone with the reverence of someone who had studied it from a careful distance for 40 years. He described it as a crystallized intersection of life and transformation, not a magical object in the conventional sense, not something enchanted or constructed, but something that had formed at the point where the principles of life and renewal had achieved physical density. He used the word convergence. He used it 9 times in 3 pages, which Hermione noted with a small sound. He also wrote in a passage that made Harry go very still that the stone was not merely a source of the elixir of life. It was, in Margrave's view, a fragment of the same force that expressed itself in the mythological phoenix, the force of absolute renewal, the principle that whatever truly lives cannot permanently die. The stone and the phoenix were the same thing in different states, one mobile and cosmic, one dense and physical. Harry read that passage again. Hermione, he said. I see it, she said. She'd gone slightly pale. The stone is related to the force, to whatever's in me. Not causally, not directly, but fundamentally, yes. Margrave is saying they're different expressions of the same underlying principle. She looked up from the book and at Harry with an expression of intense focus. Which means when Voldemort looks at you, he's not just seeing an obstacle, he's seeing a direct contradiction. Everything he's trying to do, persist, endure, avoid death through unnatural means, you are the living argument against it. You're proof that what he's doing is wrong, not morally wrong, physically wrong, ontologically wrong. He made himself wrong, Harry said slowly. And then the universe put the thing he wants inside the person who is the walking proof that he doesn't deserve it. Yes, Hermione said. Ron threw his apple core at a bin across the room, missed and said, so he's not just scared of you, he hates you. He hates what I represent, Harry said. Either way, Ron said, he's going to come at you with everything he has eventually, right? Eventually, Harry agreed. He looked back at the book. Which means I should stop waiting for eventually. Dumbledore taught no classes. His presence in the castle was ambient rather than direct. You felt him in decisions, in structures, in the way the school ran itself along principles that bore his fingerprints. But occasionally he was simply there, materializing in corridors or the Great Hall with the specific unhurried certainty of someone who moves through the world at his own pace and has never been required to justify it. Harry found him in the fourth-floor corridor on a Thursday afternoon, apparently examining a tapestry depicting a troll's ballet with the absorbed attention of a genuine enthusiast. The footwork is actually quite precise, Dumbledore said without turning. Third from the left. Technically competent, if unlovely. Harry stood beside him and looked at the tapestry. The troll in question was doing something with its feet that might, in dim light, be described as a chassé. I wanted to ask you something, Harry said. Then ask. Why is the stone here? A pause, small, barely there, but Harry was very good at pauses now. That's a specific question, Dumbledore said. Yes. Dumbledore turned from the tapestry. He looked at Harry with those blue eyes that were always doing more than one thing, warm and present in the front, calculating and deep in the back. How long have you known what it is? A few weeks, Harry said. I knew it was there before that, I could feel it. He met the headmaster's eyes without difficulty. I want to understand why you brought it here. Gringotts was safer by most measures. Most measures, Dumbledore acknowledged. He began walking and Harry walked beside him because this was clearly a conversation that moved. Gringotts was physically secure, but physical security is one dimension. The stone required something that Gringotts couldn't provide, which was a specific kind of protection. Dumbledore's hands were folded behind his back, his pace measured. The traps I've placed are designed around a particular principle. The stone can only be retrieved by someone who wants to find it but not to use it. Harry thought about that. The Mirror of Arist. Dumbledore glanced at him sideways. You know about the mirror. I know it exists, I've read about it. He paused. You're using it as the final lock. Whoever can see the stone in the mirror but doesn't desire to use it, they can take it, which means anyone who wants to use it can't reach it. Precisely, Dumbledore said. It is, I think, rather elegant. It is, Harry agreed, but it has a flaw. Dumbledore waited. The flaw is that Voldemort doesn't need to retrieve it himself. He needs to find someone who desires the stone without desiring to use it, who genuinely wants to protect it, to find it for purely defensive reasons. Harry paused. Someone like me, for example. If Voldemort could possess me even briefly, he could walk through your mirror. The silence was longer this time. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly, that is the flaw. Have you been waiting to see if he'd try it? Harry, have you been watching to see if he'd try to possess me, use me as the key and planning to intervene at the last moment? Harry's voice stayed even, not angry, just precise. Because if so, that's a significant piece of information to have kept from me. Dumbledore stopped walking. They were at a window, the grounds white and still below them, the castle's shadow long across the snow. I have underestimated you, Dumbledore said, and he said it with a directness that Harry recognized as genuine. Not a performance of humility, actual recalibration. Consistently, I think. Apologize for that. I'm not looking for an apology, Harry said. I'm looking for the truth. The truth, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The truth, Harry, is that I built this protection around a child I believed was, he paused, chose carefully, fulfilling a role defined by prophecy. A child who was, in that prophecy, ultimately destined to face Voldemort under specific circumstances. He looked at Harry directly. Circumstances that required a certain degree of vulnerability. Harry felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, slow and deep, like a second heartbeat. You built the plan around me being vulnerable, Harry said. Around you being human, Dumbledore said. Which I still believe you are, fundamentally. I am, Harry said, but I'm also something else, and whatever that something else is, it doesn't do vulnerable. He held the headmaster's gaze. I want to know everything about the protections, all of them, what's past the dog, what comes after that. Because when Quirrell moves and he's going to move, it'll be soon, he's running out of time, I'm going to go in there. Not because I was set up as the piece that completes the puzzle. He paused. Because he needs to be stopped, and I'm the one here who can do it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, complicated moment. The kind of moment that had years in it, the specific weight of a man reckoning with the gap between the plan he built and the reality standing in front of him. Past the dog, Dumbledore said, there is a devil's snare, then winged keys and a locked door, a life-size chess set, a troll incapacitated, a logic puzzle with potions, and then the mirror. He looked at Harry steadily. Each challenge was designed by a different teacher, each designed to stop someone who was only human. They won't stop me, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said with the specific tone of someone accepting a fact they've known for longer than they admitted. I don't suppose they will. He looked out the window. Harry, whatever is inside you, I have spent 60 years studying magic in all its forms. I have read everything there is to read. He paused, I have my own Phoenix who has lived 1,000 years and who responds to you with a recognition I have never seen him show another person. He turned back. I don't fully understand it, I would be lying if I said otherwise. But, Harry said, but I believe it is genuinely extraordinary. And I believe that whatever happens when Quirrell makes his attempt, you will not need me to save you. His voice was quiet. Which is, I confess, a very different thing from any scenario I planned for. It's all right, Harry said. Plans change. He turned and walked back the way they'd come, and Dumbledore stood at the window and watched him go, and his expression, had anyone been watching, was something that lived between profound relief and a grief he hadn't quite let himself name. The mirror showed up in Harry's life on a Sunday. He'd been doing his late-night awareness practice in the Transfiguration classroom, the castle quiet, his awareness expanded, the warmth steady and wide when something snagged his attention. Not Quirrell. Not any of the familiar signatures. Something else, 3 floors up and slightly to the east, in an unused classroom he'd registered as empty every time he'd swept past it with his awareness. It wasn't empty now. He felt something in there that was unlike any other object in the castle, not the stone's dense potential energy hum, not the triple life signature of the dog, not Quirrell's double-layered coldendrong. This was something that resonated with him specifically, that pulled on the warmth in his chest not aggressively but magnetically, the way a tuning fork pulls sound from another tuning fork nearby. He found the classroom on the 3rd floor east wing, which was technically in the out-of-bounds zone but presented no particular barrier. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The room was large and dark and cold. Moonlight came through high windows and the floor was clean enough to reflect it. Abandoned desks were stacked along the walls. And in the center of the room, standing on its own on bare stone, was the mirror. It was enormous, taller than Harry by 3 feet, with a heavy gold frame carved with figures whose postures suggested they'd once been moving. The inscription along the top read Eris Stra Eru Oit Ube Kafru Oit on Wosi, which he recognized from Hermione's notes on it, the reflection of the sentence I show not your face but your heart's desire. Harry walked toward it and looked into it. He'd half expected what he saw there. He'd read about the mirror, knew it showed desire, and had spent enough time over the past months examining himself honestly that he thought he understood what he wanted. Family, probably the standard reading was family, parents, the things he'd never had. What he saw was not that. The Harry in the mirror was standing in the center of what had clearly been a battlefield. The ground was ruined, scorched and broken, stone cracked and sky behind it the specific dark red of early morning after a long night. Around him, things that had been threats were still, not destroyed or not entirely, but quiet, settled, the way things go quiet when the thing animating them is gone. And Mirror Harry was standing in the middle of all of it with his arms slightly away from his sides and his hands open and his face completely, absolutely calm. And he was burning, not painfully, not destructively. He was burning the way a star burns, the way something burns when the fire is what it fundamentally is and has stopped trying to be anything else. Phoenix wings spread from his shoulders, vast and golden and real, each feather the color of the flame Harry held in his palm but larger, freer, moving in a wind that wasn't blowing anywhere else in the image. His scar was blazing gold. His eyes were gold. The fire came from everywhere inside him and went in every direction, and it was not a weapon, not a threat, just a truth. Harry looked at it for a long time. He didn't feel the desperate pull that Dumbledore had written about, the desire to stay, the consuming longing, because what the mirror was showing him wasn't something he lacked. It was something he was becoming. He could feel it, that image and the warmth in his chest and the 11 years of building in the dark, all pointing at the same destination. Not desire, recognition. He turned away from the mirror without difficulty. I thought you might find it, said Dumbledore from the doorway. Harry turned. Dumbledore was in his dressing gown, which was either genuine or performance. At this point, Harry wasn't always sure which. He walked forward slowly and stood beside Harry looking at the mirror. "What do you see?" Dumbledore asked. "Myself," Harry said, "finished or not finished, complete whatever I'm in the middle of becoming." He paused. "What do you see?" Dumbledore looked at the mirror for a moment. "Socks," he said. "Odd, I know, one can always use a good pair of socks." Harry looked at him sideways. Dumbledore met his gaze and the headmaster's smile was smaller than usual, and underneath it something more complex. "What I actually see," he said quietly, "is not something I can easily describe, and perhaps it's better that way." He looked back at the mirror. "Does it pull you, the image?" "No," Harry said, "because it's not something I want, it's something I am. Wanting something implies you don't have it. I have this, I'm just not all the way into it yet." Dumbledore was quiet. The moonlight made the gold frame glow faintly. "Harry," he said, "I should have moved the mirror. I moved it here temporarily while reconfiguring the final chamber, and then I should have moved it." He paused. "I'm glad you found it first rather than someone else." "Rather than Quirrell," Harry said. "Yes." A long pause. "I want you to be careful. I know you're perhaps beyond needing to be told to be careful in the conventional sense. But the fragment of Voldemort is desperate. Desperate things are unpredictable even when they're weak." "I know," Harry said. He looked at the mirror one more time, at the burning, complete winged thing that wore his face, and nodded to it, the way you nod to someone you haven't seen in a while but expect to see again soon. "I'm not afraid of him." "I know you're not," Dumbledore said. "That's not why I'm asking you to be careful." He paused. "I'm asking because you are 11 years old, and whatever cosmic force you carry, you are still a child. And I am." Something genuine, something unguarded, moved through his expression for just a moment. "I am still the one responsible for you." Harry looked at him, at the genuine thing underneath the strategy and the architecture. "I know," he said, and he meant it differently than he'd meant it a moment before. Ron's reaction to the mirror story the next morning at breakfast was characteristically practical. "So it showed you yourself, but on fire with wings in the middle of a battlefield," Ron said, loading his plate with eggs, "more or less. And you just turned away from it. It wasn't pulling me." "Right," Ron chewed. "Do you reckon if I looked in it I'd see myself winning the Quidditch World Cup?" "Probably," Harry said. "That seems healthier, honestly." He looked over at Hermione, who had her notes out at breakfast, which was either dedicated or alarming depending on your perspective. "Hermione, put those away, there's food." "I'm looking at something," Hermione said without moving the notes. "What?" Harry asked. She turned the notes toward them. She'd been reconstructing the chamber sequence from Dumbledore's description. Harry had told them both in detail that morning. 6 obstacles, drawn in a neat diagram with her annotations beside each one. "I've been thinking about which of these Quirrell can get through on his own and which he can't. The Devil's Snare, probably he teaches Dada. The keys, yes, he can fly reasonably well. The chess set," she frowned, "possibly not. The chess set was designed by McGonagall and she doesn't do things by halves." "He won't be playing chess," Ron said. He'd stopped eating and was looking at the diagram with the specific focus he brought to anything strategic. "If he's going in, he's going to blast through as quickly as possible. Subtlety is not his priority. He's carrying something that was once a very powerful dark wizard," Harry said. "Raw force isn't the issue for him. What the challenges are actually stopping is cleverness, the logic puzzle especially. You can't blast a logic puzzle." "Snape designed the logic puzzle," Hermione said. "There are 7 bottles, the clue is a poem, it's genuinely not solvable through force." She tapped it. "That's his bottleneck." "Unless he's smarter than we think," Ron said. "He's not solving it himself," Harry said. They both looked at him. "He's been a professor here for months. He's had access to Snape's office, Snape's notes, potentially Snape's version of the puzzle and its solution." He watched Hermione's expression shift. "The question isn't whether Quirrell can solve the puzzle in the moment. It's whether he's already solved it." Hermione's pencil went still. "Which means," Harry continued, "that if he moves he might be able to get to the mirror, and the mirror is the only thing that stops him." "Because he wants to use the stone," Hermione said, "so the mirror won't give it to him." "Right, but if he can get me in there first, if he can possess me even briefly before I can eject him, he uses your desire to find it but not use it," Hermione said. "He gets the stone from the mirror in your body," Ron said very quietly. "We need to not let that happen. We need to be ready," Harry said. "When he goes, I go immediately, not after." "And us?" Ron said. Harry looked at him. He'd been thinking about this, about the 2 of them and what Quirrell carried and what the chambers held and whether bringing them was the right choice or the wrong one. "You get me there," he said. "Past the dog, that's the moment when he'll have already dealt with the dog or tried to. If he's triggered it, the chamber will be open." He looked at Hermione. "You know Devil's Snare, you know it better than anyone." "Fire," she said immediately. "Or light, it retreats from light." "Right. You get me through that." "Ron," he looked at his best friend, "if the chess set is active, if it's mid-game, can you solve it?" Ron looked at the diagram. He was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of a chess player looking at a position, not confidence, not uncertainty, but the particular focused emptiness of someone doing real calculation. Yes, he said, not bravado, just fact. Then you get me to the potion room, Harry said. After that I go alone, the mirror and whatever's in that final chamber, that's between me and Quirrell. Harry, Hermione started. Hermione, he looked at her directly. What Quirrell carries. You've read about it, you understand what it is. I need you to tell me honestly whether you believe either of you can be in that room. She held his gaze. She was doing the thing she did when she was being genuinely rigorous, stripping away what she wanted to be true and looking at what was actually true. It took about 10 seconds. No, she said, I don't think we can. Right, Harry said, so you get me there and I finish it. Ron picked up his fork. He looked at Harry with the specific expression he wore when he'd arrived at a decision he wasn't entirely happy with but had made anyway. Fine, he said, but you tell us everything afterward. Everything, Harry agreed, and if you die, I won't. But if you do, Ron, just hypothetically, Ron, I carry the force of cosmic renewal inside my chest. If I die, I come back. He picked up his juice. It's basically in the job description. Ron stared at him, then Fred Weasley, who had apparently been listening from 2 seats down, leaned over and said, Did he just say he'd come back from the dead like it was a minor inconvenience? Yes, Ron said. Brilliant, Fred said and went back to his breakfast. The first snow of real winter came that night, and in the morning the castle was transformed. Every parapet and windowsill padded white, every courtyard a clean slate. Harry sat in the common room after dinner while Christmas preparations were happening around him, Seamus and Dean arguing about something, Neville attempting to explain a card game to a portrait, the fire doing its honest orange work in the hearth, and felt the warmth in his chest and looked at his hands. He held one up. Let the flame come. It was bigger than it used to be. Not dramatically, not explosively, it had grown the way everything real grew, gradually and unannounced, and one day you looked at it and it was simply more than it had been. It sat in his palm and burned its gold-white clean light and cast no shadow and consumed nothing. He thought about Margrave's text, about the stone and the force being different states of the same principle, about the mirror showing him wings. He thought about Voldemort not with fear, not with hate, but with the specific clear attention you gave to a problem you intended to solve. A fragment of something that had been a man, that had hollowed the man out in its desperation to endure, that had attached itself to a nervous professor and pointed itself at a room in this building like a gun pointed at a door. He thought about the fact that the universe had put its oldest force of renewal in the same building as the thing that wanted eternal life through perversion of the natural order, and he thought about the specific quality of cosmic irony that implied. He closed his hand. The flame went out. From across the common room, Hermione looked up from her book and met his eyes, and something passed between them, not words, just understanding, the specific understanding of people who have been through enough together that communication simplified itself. She gave him a small, serious nod. He gave her one back. Ron, catching this exchange, looked between them. Are we all doing the meaningful silent communication thing? He said. Because I want to participate, but I don't know what we're silently communicating. That we're ready, Hermione said, going back to her book. Ron looked at Harry. Harry held up the small marble of golden flame for just a moment in the firelight, visible and real and warm. Ron nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, all right. He picked up his chess set. Right, someone play me, I need to practice. Outside, the snow fell, and somewhere in the castle's stone bones something waited in the dark, patient and cold and not quite alive. And the children by the fire made their preparations with the specific unhurried certainty of people who were no longer afraid of what was coming. They were ready for it. Chapter 5. The God of the Dungeons. The thing about certainty is that it doesn't announce itself. Harry woke at 2 in the morning on the 15th of December and lay still for exactly 4 seconds, eyes open, looking at the dark canopy of his four-poster. The warmth in his chest was not elevated. It was not singing. It was simply present in a way that was different from its usual resting state, the way a fire is different when it knows wind is coming. He expanded his awareness before he'd consciously decided to. The castle, stone and warmth and sleeping life distributed through its towers and corridors, familiar as a neighborhood he'd walked 100 times. The grounds cold and white, the lake, the forbidden forest, complex and tangled and alive, and on the 3rd floor, movement. The double signature, guttering human light, cold, purposeful dark underneath was at the door. Not approaching it, opening it. The deep triple breathing behind it shifted, the 3-chord life signature of the dog suddenly alert, suddenly vast, suddenly silence. Then the door swinging wide. Harry was out of bed in one motion, trainers on, wand in his right hand. He paused at the dormitory door and looked back at Ron's curtained bed and thought for 2 seconds about whether to wake him. He thought about the chess set, about what came after. He went back. He put one hand on Ron's shoulder through the curtain. Ron surfaced from sleep with the specific speed of someone who'd been sleeping lightly all week. Is it? Yes, Harry said. Get Hermione. I'll meet you at the portrait hole in 2 minutes. He didn't wait for the answer, he was already moving. Hermione arrived at the portrait hole with her hair not entirely managed and her wand already out and her expression set in the specific way it set when she had converted alarm into function. She took one look at Harry's face and asked no questions. Ron was behind her, still pulling his robe on. Dogs dealt with? He's past it, Harry said. He was moving as he spoke, through the portrait hole and into the corridor. He was inside when I woke up. He's had time. How much time? Hermione said, keeping pace. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Harry took the stairs 2 at a time. He has the puzzle solution, he'll move fast. The castle at 3 a.m. was its own kind of place, entirely still, the kind of stillness that gathered in the spaces between occupied rooms in corridors lit only by the ambient glow of enchanted torches burning low. Their footsteps were soft on the stone. Harry's awareness ran ahead of them like a scent scout sweeping the floors above, tracking the signature. He's through the devil's snare, Harry said. Already? Ron said. He's prepared, he knows the layout. 3rd floor. The corridor was exactly as it had always been from the outside, unremarkable door in an unremarkable wall. The kind of deliberate plainness that announced itself as a disguise to anyone paying attention. The door stood open, Harry went first. The stairway beyond was narrow and steep, curving down into a warmer darkness that smelled like animal and old stone. At the bottom, the chamber was large and round and floored with stone, and in the center of it, in a 3-headed heap of dark fur and slow rhythmic breathing, lay Fluffy. All 3 heads were asleep. On the floor beside the dog, a small enchanted harp still playing a melody that had gone slightly thin as its spell faded. Harry glanced at it. Hermione was right beside him, already scanning the chamber. There, she said, pointing at the trapdoor in the floor, halfway beneath one enormous paw. Open, dark drop below. Music, Ron said, looking at the harp. That's elegant, actually. Who'd think Quirrell? Not Quirrell's idea, Harry said. He crouched and looked through the trapdoor, complete dark below and from it the specific dense vegetable smell of devil's snare. He looked at Hermione. She was already reaching into her robe for the small bottle of bluebell flame she kept there, a habit she'd developed after the troll incident, fire in a bottle, because knowing about a danger was only half the response and having a tool was the other half. Go, she said to Harry. I'll follow. Ron, you're after me. Harry dropped through. The darkness lasted about 2 seconds before his awareness mapped it, the snake-like tendrils of the snare moving upward automatically, reaching for anything that came through the trap. He felt them brush his ankles and his arms, and the warmth in his chest responded with the ease of something recognizing a simple problem. He simply burned, not an explosion, not a dramatic surge. The warmth extended from his skin in a radius of about 4 feet, steady and full, and the devil's snare that touched it recoiled immediately, shrinking away from the heat the way all living things retract from what will hurt them. It cleared a space around him in about 3 seconds, the tendrils pulling back and writhing, and Harry stepped through to the solid floor beyond and turned. Hermione came through the trap. The snare touched her and Harry's warmth was already there, already holding the space, and she landed on clear floor and exhaled sharply. Ron came through, same result. That was, Ron started. Forward, Harry said. The key chamber was a large vaulted room with hundreds of winged keys circling lazily near the ceiling in a slow aerial current, and the locked door on the far side, and 3 broomsticks leaning against the wall. Harry looked at the door and looked at the keys and felt the warmth pulse once, reading the room. Quirrell's signature was ahead, moving already beyond this chamber. He'd solved the key puzzle. Harry looked at the broomsticks and made a decision in about 1 second. He didn't touch them. He walked to the door and put his right hand flat against the lock and felt the enchantment inside it, a specific magical frequency keyed to the correct winged key, a clever design, mechanically sound. He felt the shape of it the way he felt the shape of everything now, the internal structure of its magic, and he closed his eyes for half a second and let the warmth focus to a point precise and thin as a needle. The lock clicked. Ron stared at the door as it swung open. You can just do that. The lock's a magical frequency, Harry said. If you can feel the frequency, you can match it. He moved through. Come on. He can open locks with his hands, Ron said to Hermione. I noticed, Hermione said. Is there anything he can't, Ron? Harry said from the other side. Coming, Ron said. The chest chamber was something else. Harry stopped in the doorway and looked at it properly, because it deserved a proper look. The room was enormous, cathedral scale, Harry would say later, though it wasn't quite. The ceiling lost in shadow, the floor a colossal chessboard of black and white stone, each square easily 6 feet across. The pieces were carved from dark marble on the black side, pale alabaster on the white, and they were enormous. The pawns were the size of small adults. The rooks were columns of stone with faces. The queen was taller than most of the doorways in the castle. They were animated, not waiting, watching. The black pieces turned their carved faces toward the three of them with the specific patient menace of things that had been designed to do violence, and were entirely comfortable with that purpose. On the far side of the board, the door to the next chamber. And on the floor, between two shattered alabaster pawns, clear evidence of Quirrell's passage. A path of destruction blasted through the white pieces, rubble and dust, and the scattered limbs of marble knights who had tried and failed to stop something with more raw force than strategic sophistication. Harry looked at it. He blasted through. Of course he did, Ron said, staring at the destruction. He doesn't care about finishing the game, he stopped. His expression had gone strange. Harry, look at the board. Harry looked. The blast path had gone through the white side, Quirrell's side, since the entrance was on the white end and had left the black pieces untouched. But the blast hadn't been clean, it hadn't been a single straight line. The black pieces had moved to intercept and had been scattered by the force of the counterblast, and the board was now in the specific chaos of a game interrupted mid-play. The board's still active, Ron said. He walked to the edge of the first square, studying the positions with the focused trance of a chess player doing very fast calculation. The black pieces have been defending. They adjusted when Quirrell went through by force. He turned to Harry. If I play this correctly, if I play black from here, the right moves, can you win from here? Ron looked at the board for 15 seconds. Harry watched his face do its calculation thing, the same face he'd seen across common room games for months, the specific absence of expression that meant everything was happening behind the eyes. Yes, Ron said. 4 moves, maybe 5. But he looked at Harry. The board expects a proper game. Me playing means I go on the board as a piece. That's dangerous, Hermione said immediately. The pieces don't attack players who are playing, Ron said, and he said it with the confidence of someone who had spent an enormous amount of time reading about magical chess because he genuinely loved it. They might knock you around a bit, but they won't. It's not designed to kill, it's designed to test. He looked at the board again. It tested Quirrell. He failed the test and got past anyway with raw power. He looked at Harry. I can solve it properly, the way it's meant to be solved. Harry looked at him. At the easy, specific certainty on his best friend's face, not bravado, not performance, just the calm of someone in their element. Ron Weasley on a chessboard was something Harry had come to understand deeply in the past few months. He was, in this specific context, extraordinary. Okay, Harry said. Ron stepped onto the board. The pieces acknowledged him the way pieces acknowledge a player, a shift of attention, a reorientation, the knight nearest him turning its massive head. Ron walked to the Black Queen's side with the unhurried calm of someone who belonged there, took a position beside the remaining Black Bishop, and looked at the board. Right, he said under his breath to himself. Then to the board, knight to f3. The knight moved, the white pieces adjusted. Ron said bishop to c4 and queen to h4, and on the 4th move he said, quiet and certain, queen takes pawn at f2, and the board went still. All 32 remaining pieces, the whole remaining field, stopped. And then, one by one, the white pieces stepped back off the squares, clearing the path to the far door in the specific acknowledging way of chess pieces conceding a position. Ron walked back across the board. He looked slightly pink, which Harry was coming to understand was Ron's version of trying not to show he was pleased with himself. 4 moves, Hermione said. She was looking at him with an expression Harry recognized, the one she wore when someone had exceeded her expectations in a specific and impressive way. Ron, that was genuinely brilliant, Ron shrugged. It's just chess, he said. It wasn't, Harry said. He looked at his friend. Thank you. Ron met his eyes, nodded once quickly the way people do when they're accepting something serious without wanting to make it heavy. Troll room's next, he said. Should be incapacitated, Dumbledore said. It was. Whatever Quirrell had done to it had been efficient and final, the creature a sleeping mass in the corner, and they moved through quickly. The potion room, 7 bottles on a table, the poem on the wall. Hermione read it in the time it took Harry to scan the room and feel the enchantments in it. Complex Snape's work, the signature of his magic, precise and cold and clever. The fire at each end, one a black fire, one a purple fire, both magical barriers that would stop anyone from going forward or backward without the right bottle. Hermione read the poem a second time. Her lips moved. Her eyes went rapidly from bottle to bottle, and Harry watched her do it. The sequential analysis, the elimination, the rapid construction of the logical tree. He had always thought this was perhaps the most impressive thing about her, not the reading or the research, but the speed of this, the way her mind moved through a problem with the efficiency of a machine that was also somehow deeply human. This one, she said, pointing to the smallest bottle. This gets you through the black fire. There's only enough for one person. She paused. And this one, the round bottle second from the right, gets you back through the purple fire. Harry picked up the smallest bottle. It was cool in his palm. He looked at both of them. "This is where you stop," he said. Hermione opened her mouth. "Hermione," he held her gaze, "I need you to go back. Both of you send an owl to Dumbledore. He's not in the school tonight, I checked. Get him here. That's the most important thing you can do right now." She looked at him for a moment with the specific expression she wore when she was deciding whether to argue and had determined against her instincts not to. "You'll tell us everything," she said, "not a question." "Everything," he said. She stepped forward and did something surprising. She hugged him quickly, fiercely, the way someone hugs when they mean it and don't have time to overthink it. Then she stepped back. Ron put out his hand. Harry took it. Ron gripped it once, solid and real, and said, "Come back in one piece, yeah." "Plan to," Harry said. "Good." Ron released his hand. "Go do the impossible thing." Harry turned to the black fire. He held the small bottle. He thought about drinking it and then thought about what it was, an enchantment designed to let one person pass, keyed to human magical biology. He felt it against his palm, its small cold potential, and thought about whether he needed it. The warmth in his chest considered the black fire the way it considered most obstacles, as a question rather than a barrier. He felt the fire's magical nature. Intense, cold, a barrier enchantment, designed to stop and harm anything that passed through it without the right counter. He thought about fire that consumed and fire that simply was. He stepped through without drinking it. The black fire moved against him and found nothing to catch on. No resistance, no damage, not even warmth. It simply pressed against the Phoenix Force's baseline presence and conceded, the way all lesser fires concede to the one that is bigger, older, and more fundamental. He came through the other side. The final chamber opened before him. It was smaller than the others, lower ceiling. Stone floor, clean and cold. The mirror of Eris stood against the far wall, exactly where it had been when Harry had found it in the unused classroom. Moved here, Dumbledore had said, returned to its proper position as the final lock. And in front of the mirror with his back to Harry stood Professor Quirrell. He was standing very still, looking into the glass, and even from the back Harry could see that it was working. The mirror was giving him nothing. His shoulders were tight with frustration, his hands pressed flat against his sides. He was muttering, low and continuous, and what he was muttering was not entirely in his own voice. Harry walked into the room. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Quirrell turned. His face was strange. It had always been strange to Harry's doubled awareness, the flickering human light over the cold dark underneath, but now this close with no pretense required and the masks coming off, it was something more starkly wrong. Quirrell's own expression was fear, habitual and grounded, the fear of a man who had made a terrible bargain and had been paying interest on it for a year. Underneath it, pressing through his eyes, through the set of his mouth, through the quality of his stillness, the other thing. The fragment, cold and purposeful and furious. It looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Potter," Quirrell said, and it was both voices at once, Quirrell's stutter entirely gone, replaced by the double register of two entities speaking through one throat. "Professor," Harry said, "you should not be here." And yet, Harry said, the warmth in his chest was doing what it had done in the chess chamber, on the Quidditch pitch, in the corridor with the troll, not spiking, not surging, simply arriving at its full resting height, the way a flame burns when there's no draft to diminish it. He felt the room. Felt Quirrell's two-layered life signature, the mirror's profound ancient resonance, the stone floor, the low ceiling. Felt the distance between himself and Quirrell at roughly 15 feet, the distance between Quirrell and the mirror at roughly 4. "You cannot stop this," Quirrell said. "He will rise. He has always risen. Whatever you carry inside you, he knows what I carry," Harry said. "Tell him I said hello." A convulsion moved through Quirrell's face, not Quirrell's reaction, the other thing's reaction, fury compressed into the limited medium of a human expression. And then the voice changed, dropped, went colder. "Harry Potter," said Voldemort through Quirrell's mouth. No stutter, no affect. Just the voice, smooth and cold, and carrying in it the specific quality of absolute conviction. The conviction of something that has decided what it is and has been that thing for so long it's forgotten there was ever a choice. "How extraordinary, how unexpected." "Is it?" Harry said. "To find you here, yes." A pause. The cold thing behind Quirrell's eyes was doing what it always did when Harry was near, assessing, calculating, pressing against the boundary of the Phoenix Force's presence with the specific probing attention of something that wants to understand what it's afraid of. "I expected the old man's pet." "Dumbledore's not here tonight," Harry said. "No," Voldemort said, "he isn't." Something like satisfaction moved through Quirrell's voice. "By design." Harry filed that away. He looked at the mirror behind Quirrell. "You can't get the stone from it," he said, "because you want to use it." "I want to live," Voldemort said, and there was something in it that might in another context have been almost plaintive. "Is that so extraordinary, the desire to live?" "What you're doing isn't living," Harry said. He kept his voice even, not cruel, not contemptuous, just accurate. "I can feel what you are. I've been able to feel it since September. There are two fires in every living person, the physical and the essential. You've burned your essential one almost completely out. What's left is persistence. Habit. Memory of a person pressing against the world because it doesn't know what else to do. He paused. You're not afraid of dying, you've already done most of it. The quality of silence in the room changed. Quirrell's hands came up and the wand in his right hand was steady in a way that Quirrell himself had never been steady in this building. You presume, Voldemort said, cold and precise, to tell me what I am. I can see what you are, Harry said. That's different from presuming. Then see this. The curse was wordless. A black, dense thing, not the killing curse but something adjacent to it, something that hit the air between them with the specific force of power that has spent decades being refined for a single purpose. It was a very good curse. It would have stopped most things. Harry raised his right hand. The fire that met it was not theatrical. He didn't shout an incantation or brace for impact or do any of the things that battles in stories usually required. The warmth in his chest moved outward through his palm, and the fire that emerged was the same fire it had always been, golden white, clean, the color of early morning and old stars, and it hit Voldemort's curse the way a river hits a stone. The curse dissolved. Not deflected, dissolved, the dark compressed magic coming apart against the phoenix fire the way shadow comes apart against light, not a contest of forces but a simple statement of categories. Quirrell stared at his wand. Again, said Voldemort. 3 more curses, escalating in force, each of them sophisticated, each of them the product of decades of study in the darkest areas of magic. Harry stopped all of them, not with effort, not with visible strain, but with the same patient steady fire, the same extension of the warmth from his chest outward through his hands. He was standing still. He hadn't moved. The room was beginning to smell of scorched air. What are you? Voldemort said, not tactical now, genuine. The voice had shifted from cold certainty into something rower, the specific tone of something encountering a variable it didn't account for. I told you, Harry said. You felt it in October when you tried to jinx my broom. You felt it every time Quirrell was in the same room as me. He looked at Quirrell's face, at the double image, the guttering light and the cold beneath. You know exactly what I am, you just don't want it to be true. I want the stone, Voldemort said. I know, help me get it. The cold voice had shifted again. This was calculation. Harry recognized it, the methodical logic of something trying every available angle. You have the ability to retrieve it from the mirror, I can see that. You don't want it for yourself. Get the stone, give it to me, and I will tell you things about your parents you have never been told, things the old man has kept from you. Harry looked at him. Your mother's magic, Voldemort said. The night she died, what she actually did, what it cost her, what it created. A pause. Don't you want to know, Harry? The warmth in Harry's chest pulsed, once, not in response to the offer. In response to the manipulation, the specific quality of something calculating correctly that the offer should be painful and offering it anyway, in the way that something without genuine feeling understands the mechanism of feeling without sharing it. You're going to tell me, Harry said, that my mother did something extraordinary. I know she did something extraordinary I've known for months. Hermione found it in a manuscript from 1203. He met Quirrell's eyes, met what lived behind them, held its gaze with complete untroubled steadiness. You don't have anything I need. The cold thing in Quirrell's eyes went very still, then it said, quiet as anything, possess him, and Quirrell's body moved. The possession was fast, Harry had expected it, but the speed was still something. Quirrell crossed the 15 feet between them in about 2 seconds and there was a moment of contact. Quirrell's hands on Harry's shoulders, and Harry felt the cold thing surge forward through Quirrell like water through a broken dam, pressing against the boundaries of Harry's awareness with the specific force of something that had done this before and was very good at it. It hit the Phoenix Force. The result was not a contest. Harry had thought during the long months of awareness practice about what would happen if something tried to possess him, tried to slide its consciousness past his and take control of his body. He'd thought about it with the same quality of attention he'd given to everything else practically honestly. He'd thought about the warmth in his chest and what it was and what it would do to something cold that tried to share the space. He hadn't been wrong. The possession lasted approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the cold fragment of Voldemort pressed into Harry's awareness and found the Phoenix Force, vast and ancient and burning, and recoiled the way a wave recoils from a seawall. Not pushed back by effort. Not expelled by will. Simply encountered something so fundamentally opposed to its own nature that coexistence was physically impossible, the way darkness physically cannot exist in the same space as light. Harry felt it, the cold thing's panic, sharp and real, the sensation of something being unmade not by violence but by incompatibility, and then Quirrell stumbled backward, hard, clutching his own head and the double signature fractured. Harry looked at his own hands. Clean, unmarked, Quirrell was on his knees. His own face, not the thing behind it, was pale and wet and his hands were pressed to his temples, and for a moment Harry saw him clearly, the actual person, terrified, diminished, carrying something that was killing him slowly from the inside. A man who had made a terrible bargain and had been paying interest on it long enough that he'd forgotten what he'd bought. Let it go, Harry said. He meant it. Quirrell, it's using you, you know that. I can't, Quirrell's voice was fractured, both of them in it. He's everywhere, I can't. You can, Harry said. I can help you if you. You cannot help him, Voldemort said, surging back into Quirrell's voice with the specific force of something regaining control. He is mine, he has been mine since Albania. The voice was cold and furious and precise. And you, Harry Potter, cannot stop what is already in motion. This body is failing, this vessel is nearly done, but there are others, there are always others, and I will return, I will always return. I know, Harry said, then you know you cannot win. Harry looked at the voice, at the cold thing behind the failing eyes. He thought about Aldrich's manuscript, about Margrave's text, about the mirror showing him wings and fire. He thought about the Phoenix Force and what it was at its most fundamental level, not a weapon, not a power, but a principle. The principle that life, genuine life, could not be permanently negated. That was what it was, that was all it was. And the corollary of that principle, which he hadn't seen stated explicitly in any text but which seemed to him, standing here, self-evident, that death, genuine death, could not be permanently avoided. You don't want to live, Harry said. You never did, you wanted to be unable to die. Those are completely different things. He looked at what was left of Quirrell, at the failing vessel of a man, and felt the specific sadness of looking at something wasted. A man who genuinely wanted to live would know the difference. Poetic, Voldemort said, irrelevant. Let me show you something, Harry said. He raised both hands. The fire that came this time was different, not in color, still the golden white, still the clean ancient light. Not in source, still from the warmth in his chest, still from wherever the Phoenix Force lived in the space behind his ribs. The difference was in scale. He stopped holding it to a comfortable size. Stopped maintaining the polite margin he'd been keeping since September. The unconscious habit of keeping the warmth dialed to something that didn't overwhelm the room or alarm the building. He let it be what it was. The light that came from his hands lit the entire chamber the way noon lit an open field. His scar blazed gold, and the light from it was the same light as his hands, the same light as the flame in his palm had always been, just more of it, vastly more, the accumulated 11 years of it and the cosmic millennia of it, all present at once, all coherent, all pointing in the same direction. The mirror of Arist blazed behind him, catching the light and multiplying it. The gold frame became burning gold. The stone floor lit in radiating lines from where Harry stood. The shadows fled to the corners and stayed there. Quirrell went rigid. Not from a spell, the Phoenix fire hadn't touched him. But the cold thing inside him had pressed against Harry's awareness once already and knew what it was, and now the full presence of it was in the room, fully present, fully real, and the cold thing reacted. It pressed Quirrell backward against the mirror, and Quirrell's hands hit the glass, and the mirror showed Quirrell something. Harry didn't know what. The mirror showed you your heart's desire, and Quirrell's heart, whatever was left of it that was still genuinely his, desired something the cold thing could not give him. He saw it on Quirrell's face, the actual face, the human one, underneath the borrowed coldness, an expression of terrible, startled recognition. Quirrell said in his own voice, "Oh," and then the cold thing screamed. Not through Quirrell's throat, through the air, through the stone. A sound that wasn't quite sound, the specific frequency of something being separated from what it had occupied. It pressed outward in every direction looking for purchase and found none. The Phoenix fire in the room was total, the presence of it absolute, and there was nothing for cold and dark to grip in a room full of light. Harry felt it go. The cold signature extinguished, not transferred, not escaped, not fled. Simply ended in the specific way that a small darkness ends when you open the curtains. Quirrell collapsed. Harry crossed the room in about 4 steps and knelt beside him. The life signature was very faint now. A single, simple flame, just Quirrell's own. And it was guttering in the way that fires guttered when the fuel was nearly gone. The damage the fragment had done from the inside was evident in a way it hadn't been when the cold thing had been present to conceal it. Quirrell's eyes were open, his face was his own. Is he started, and his voice was entirely his own, the stutter back, and something in that small humanizing detail was the saddest part of the whole evening. Gone, Harry said. He's gone from you. Is he dead? I don't know, Harry said honestly. Not in the stone sense, not gone from the world, but gone from you. He put his hand on Quirrell's shoulder. We'll get you out of here. I don't, Quirrell stopped. His eyes went somewhere Harry couldn't follow. He was in me for so long, he said quietly, as if this were the strangest thing about the whole experience. I'd forgotten what it was like to be yourself. Quirrell looked at him. The fear was still there in his face, the grounded habitual fear, but underneath it something else, relief perhaps, or the first fragile edge of it. Potter, don't, Harry said, not unkindly. There'll be time for that later. He stood and looked at the mirror, and the mirror showed him what it had always shown him, himself burning, wings calm in the wreckage. The same image, unmodified, the same recognition rather than desire. He held its gaze for one more moment and nodded to it, the way you nod to something that told you a true thing. Then he looked at the table beside the mirror. at the small red stone sitting there where Quirrell must have placed it when the mirror refused him, setting it aside to focus on Harry. The stone was warm in a way that wasn't thermal, the dense potential energy hum he'd felt from 3 floors above it, the resonance of the animam ignis at its most concentrated. He picked it up. It sat in his palm beside his own fire, and he felt the resonance between them. The stone's principle and the force's principle. The same thing in different states, like water and ice, like song and silence. 2 expressions of the idea that life, genuine and essential, didn't end, couldn't be ended, could be diverted or suppressed or forced underground, but would always eventually come back. He closed his fingers around it. He walked back across the chamber. He stopped at the purple fire where the small round bottle waited on the table, and again thought about what fire was and what he was, and simply stepped through. The purple fire conceded exactly as the black fire had. He walked back through the logic puzzle room, bottles undisturbed, Snape's enchantment quiet, and through the ruined chess chamber, and through the room where the troll lay sleeping, and through the winged keys chamber, and at the bottom of the devil's snare he found Hermione and Ron waiting. They'd come back, of course they had. Hermione opened her mouth. Harry shook his head slightly, not stop but wait. He looked at Quirrell in his arms, barely conscious, and Hermione's expression rearranged itself immediately into the practical, and she was already casting diagnostic charms as Harry laid Quirrell gently on the clear floor. Ron was looking at the stone in Harry's hand. Is that? Yes, Harry said, and Quirrell, he needs a healer, fast. And Voldemort gone, Harry said, for now. He met Ron's eyes. Not forever, he said himself, there are always other vessels, but he's gone from here and gone for long enough that we have time. He looked at the stone in his palm, and he's not getting this. What do we do with it? Ron asked. Harry thought about Nicholas Flamel. Old man, centuries old, living because the stone made the elixir possible. And whatever Flamel had done with that time, whatever the centuries of life had built. He thought about the principle of the stone and the principle of the force and what it meant that they resonated with each other, 2 expressions of life's persistence. He thought about Dumbledore's plan, about mirrors and locks and the idea of putting something this fundamental inside a building full of children and hoping no one terrible noticed. I'm going to give it to Dumbledore, he said, and I'm going to tell him that keeping it anywhere someone can find it and want it is the wrong idea. He paused. I'll be clear about that. Ron looked at the stone, and if he doesn't agree, Harry closed his fingers around the warm red stone. I'll be very clear, he said. Chapter 6, the morning after the fire. Dumbledore arrived at 4:47 in the morning. Harry knew the exact time because he was sitting in the corridor outside the hospital wing when it happened. The specific shift in the castle's ambient presence, like a room settling when someone walks in, the ancient stones recognizing their headmaster returning to his building. He felt it before he heard the footsteps, and the footsteps were still 2 corridors away when he stood up from the floor and stretched. Madame Pomfrey had been very clear that Harry was not a patient, and therefore not permitted inside the wing. She'd been somewhat less clear on the question of whether the boy who had carried an unconscious professor through 5 subterranean chambers and up 3 flights of stairs, and then stood in her doorway looking entirely uninjured while explaining what had happened, that boy was also not permitted to simply leave. She'd compromised by giving him a cup of tea and putting him outside the door. Ron and Hermione were inside. Hermione had sustained a burn on her left arm from the purple fire she'd insisted on coming back through after Harry had retrieved Quirrell, not dangerous. Madame Pomfrey had said, treating it with the brisk efficiency of someone who found competence more comforting than reassurance. Ron had a bruised shoulder from something that had happened with the chess set that he hadn't mentioned at the time, and only admitted to when Hermione noticed him favoring it. Harry was, as Madame Pomfrey had noted with visible suspicion, completely fine. He heard Dumbledore's footsteps in the corridor and waited. The headmaster came around the corner with his traveling cloak still on, which meant he'd come directly, no detours, no deliberate dawdling. His face, when he saw Harry standing outside the wing, did the thing faces did when they'd been in transit with a specific imagined scenario in their heads and arrived to find a different one. The specific recalibration of expectation. He stopped. Harry held out the stone. It sat in his palm, small and red, warm and humming with its particular resonance. In the dimness of the early morning corridor, it cast a faint light, not dramatic, not glowing, just the quality of something that was more present than its size suggested. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment, then he looked at Harry. Quirrell, he said, hospital wing, he needs more than Madame Pomfrey. The fragment of Voldemort was in him for over a year. There's damage. Harry paused. He should survive, but he'll need time. And Voldemort, gone from Quirrell, gone from here. Harry held the headmaster's gaze. Not destroyed. I'm not going to tell you he's destroyed because I don't think he is. But whatever he had here, the vessel, the access to the stone, the foothold in the school, that's finished. Dumbledore was quiet. Was doing the thing he did when he was processing something real, the stillness behind the eyes, the calculating depth, working through the implications while keeping the surface calm. You went alone, he said. Ron and Hermione got me to the final chamber, Harry said. Then I went alone. I told you, you told me about the challenges, Harry said. I made the decision about how to use the information, that's different. He kept his voice even. You weren't here, someone needed to stop him. I should have been here, Dumbledore said quietly. Something moved through his expression, not guilt exactly. The specific face of guilt was too simple for what Harry saw there. More like a man examining a structural flaw in something he'd built and finding that the flaw had been present since the foundation. I was called away. The ministry there was a situation that required, he stopped. He looked at Harry directly. I was manipulated away from the school. Yes, Harry said, he arranged it. Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's palm. May I? He said. Harry placed it in the headmaster's hand. Dumbledore held it the way you held something with centuries of history, carefully, with the specific weight of awareness about what it represented. He looked at it for a long moment and then closed his fingers around it. I will contact Nicholas, he said. What happens to the stone going forward must be his decision. I think, he paused, I think perhaps its time is finished. Its purpose has been served in ways no one anticipated. Flamel will die, Harry said, without the elixir. Yes, Dumbledore said, he will. And there was something in his voice when he said it, not grief, though grief was present in it, but something more fundamental, acceptance. The specific acceptance of someone who has lived long enough to understand that everything eventually comes to its proper end. He has lived 600 years, Harry. I believe when I speak to him that he will be ready. Harry thought about Margrave's text. About the stone and the force and the same principle in different states. About the fact that Flamel's immortality and Voldemort's immortality were built on the same foundation and that the difference between them was entirely in how they'd been used, one in pursuit of life, one in avoidance of death. The same stone, completely different buildings. What will you tell the ministry? He asked. Dumbledore's expression shifted slightly. The truth, he said, a modified version of it. Modified how? The full truth, Dumbledore said with measured care, involves a discussion of what you are and what you carry and what happened in that chamber, and that discussion, had publicly or officially, invites a response from the wizarding world that would be, he paused, disruptive, in ways that would not serve you well. Disruptive to them, Harry said, or to your plans. The silence was honest this time, not defensive. Both, Dumbledore said. I won't pretend otherwise. He looked at Harry with the specific combination of warmth and calculation that Harry had come to understand was simply what his face did. The two things weren't in conflict, they coexisted, the way many true things coexisted in the same space without canceling each other out. But I will tell you this. Whatever plans I had built around you, around a certain version of you, I am in the process of rebuilding them, from different foundations. Less sacrifice, Harry said. Less sacrifice, Dumbledore agreed. Something in his expression when he said it was close to relief. As if a weight he'd been carrying had been formally recognized, and recognition was the first step towards setting it down. Harry, you said Voldemort told you he would return, that there are always other vessels. Yes. Do you believe him? Harry thought about the cold thing in Quirrell's eyes, about the quality of its conviction, the specific certainty of something that had made itself a monument to its own continuance. About the Horcrux, he hadn't called it that, didn't have the word for it yet, but he felt what it was, felt the severed fragment of a self preserved in unnatural permanence. He's made more than one of whatever he put in Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore went very still. I could feel it, Harry said. The quality of the fragment, it wasn't his whole self, not even close. It was like a copy of the most essential part of him preserved separately from the main. He paused. If you make one copy, you make more. It's the logic of someone who thinks in redundancies. He met Dumbledore's eyes. How many did he make? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the specific expression of someone realizing they've been outpaced and deciding how to respond to that. I don't know yet, he said. I have suspicions, and I have been working quietly on understanding it, but I don't have certainty. Find out, Harry said. It wasn't a demand. It was simply the next thing, the natural following step, stated plainly. When you do, tell me all of it, not the version that keeps me in the role you planned for me, the actual version. Dumbledore looked at him, at the 11-year-old boy in his first-year robes with no visible injuries standing in a corridor at 5 a.m. having just stopped a Dark Lord with his bare hands. He looked at him for a long time. Yes, he said. I will. Thank you, Harry said. He turned to go back into the hospital wing, then paused. One more thing. Yes, Quirrell. Harry looked back over his shoulder. When he's recovered, he made a bad choice and he paid for it longer than most people could have survived. I don't think he's a bad person. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Whatever happens with the ministry investigation, I think that should be taken into account. Dumbledore held his gaze. I will make sure of it, he said, and meant it. Harry went back inside. The hospital wing in the early morning was its own particular version of the world. The specific quiet of a room where people were being repaired. The functional peace of white sheets and the smell of potions and the small sounds of Madame Pomfrey moving between her patients with brisk, warm competence. Quirrell was in the far bed, deeply asleep, his face in repose looking considerably younger than it had during the teaching year. Without the cold thing pressing through it, without the fear managed on top of the fear, it was simply a face. Not particularly remarkable. The face of someone who had taken a wrong turn somewhere and had been too deep in it to see the way back. Ron was sitting up in his bed, eating from a box of every flavor beans that Fred and George had apparently sent up by owl at some ungodly hour, which said something about the twins' information network that Harry filed away for later. Hermione had her arm bandaged and was already reading. She had found a copy of Advanced Potion Making on Madame Pomfrey's shelf and was making notes in the margins which suggested she was feeling fine. Harry sat down on the edge of Ron's bed and Ron wordlessly offered the box. Harry took a bean that turned out to be toffee good luck and ate it. So Ron said, so Harry agreed, he's gone, for now. Right, Ron looked at the ceiling. For now, which means he comes back eventually. Which means it's not over. No, Harry said, it's not over. Ron processed this with the quiet steadiness of someone who had already done his version of accounting for it. Okay, he said. That's okay, we can do the long game. Hermione looked up from her book. Her eyes went from Harry to Ron and back, and something in her expression settled into the same territory Ron had arrived at, not resigned, not anxious, but committed. The specific quality of someone who has made a choice that's more comfortable than it looks from the outside because it was freely made. Tell us everything, she said, so Harry did. He started from when he'd gone through the trapdoor and he told it clearly and without embellishment. The way he told most things, sequentially, honestly, with the specific respect for the listener that meant not dramatizing or editorializing. He told them about the devil's snare, about opening the lock, about the way the black fire had felt against his skin. He told them about Quirrell turning in the final chamber and the possession attempt and the specific sensation of the Phoenix Force meeting the cold fragment and the fragment simply having no foothold. He told them about Quirrell's face at the end. The relief. When he finished, Ron was quiet for a moment, eating a bean that made him briefly look disgusted. Earwax, he mouthed at Harry, and then he said, you know what's strange? What? You went through 5 magical barriers, expelled a Dark Lord from inside a person, and got the most valuable object in the world. And you're completely, he gestured at Harry's general condition, fine, and I've got a bruised shoulder from a chess piece. You played brilliantly, Harry said. I know, Ron said. I'm not complaining, I'm just noting the disparity. Would you prefer the cosmic fire? Harry asked. Ron thought about it with genuine consideration. Nah, he said, I'll keep my chess. He paused. And my sanity. Hermione made a noise that wasn't quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. She was looking at her notes and her expression was the one Harry had come to think of as her working face, the external signal of an internal process that had been running all night and was now producing output. The Horcrux question, she said. Both Harry and Ron looked at her. She'd written the word down, Horcrux, which Harry hadn't known, hadn't had the term for, but which fit the shape of what he'd felt like a hand fitting a glove. You know what they are, Harry said. I read about them in the restricted section. Months ago, I didn't want to bring it up without more information because the implications were, she stopped. She looked at Harry. A Horcrux is a fragment of a person's soul preserved by anchoring it to a physical object. The method of creation is it requires murder. The act of murder tears the soul and the piece can be captured in an object. She paused. The object becomes indestructible by ordinary means, and the soul fragment can theoretically sustain a partial consciousness even if the body is destroyed. Which is how he survived Godric's Hollow, Ron said. Which is how he survived, Hermione said. But Harry's right that there are likely more than one. The logic of it demands redundancy. If you're going to go to the extreme of tearing your own soul, if you're that committed to surviving, you'd make multiple anchors. She looked at Harry. And you felt it, the quality of the fragment in Quirrell, that it was a fragment. It felt like a small piece of something that had been once very large, Harry said, like a shard. So there are more, Ron said, more objects with pieces of Voldemort inside them. Somewhere in the world, Hermione said, yes. The three of them sat with this for a moment. Outside the hospital wing windows, the sky was doing the specific early morning thing where the dark was deciding to become light, the transition still ambiguous, the horizon a line of indeterminate gray. Then that's what comes next, Harry said, finding them. You make it sound simple, Ron said. It won't be simple, Harry said, but it's what comes next, one thing at a time. Hermione closed her notebook. She had the expression she wore when she'd arrived at a decision and was at peace with it. We have years, she said. We're 11, we have time to prepare properly. Research the Horcruxes, understand what they are and what can destroy them. She glanced at Harry. Though I suspect you already have some thoughts on that. Harry thought about the Phoenix fire meeting the cold fragment in the final chamber, about the fragment having no foothold, no purchase, coming apart in the light. He thought about what could destroy a soul fragment anchored in an object, what kind of force could unmake something made by the darkest possible act, could counteract the energy of a soul deliberately torn. He thought about what he was. One thing at a time, he said. The ministry arrived on Thursday. 3 of them in their distinctive lime green robes, with clipboards and the specific energy of people who have been sent to assess something unsettling and intend to make sure it stays properly categorized. Their names were Williamson, Hopkirk, and a very young man called Fudge, no relation to the minister. He said immediately, preemptively, and they set up in a conference room off the entrance hall with the portable formality of officials who carried their bureaucracy with them. Harry was summoned to see them after lunch. He sat across the table from them and answered their questions. Yes, he'd entered the restricted corridor. Yes, he'd been aware it was out of bounds. Yes, he understood the regulations around underage magic. Yes, he was aware that Professor Quirrell was currently under medical care. They asked about what he'd done in the final chamber. He described it accurately. He described the fire. He described the possession attempt and its resolution. He described the fragment of Voldemort, and at that name all 3 of them flinched in the specific way that people who'd grown up in the wizarding world flinched, the trained reflex and its departure from Quirrell's consciousness. When he finished, the 3 of them were quiet for a moment. Williamson, the senior one, said carefully, "And this fire, you produced it wandlessly?" "Yes." "At age 11? "Yes." "That's," he made a note on his clipboard, then looked at it, then looked at Harry. "That's not possible," he said. "Wandless magic at that level isn't, the regulatory framework doesn't have a category for." "I understand," Harry said politely. "The trace, the underage magic detection, our records show nothing was triggered. Not once in the entire incident. Every spell cast by every student is logged." Williamson looked at his colleagues. Young Fudge was writing very rapidly. Hopkirk was looking at Harry with the specific expression of someone trying to locate a policy for a situation that doesn't have one. "Your magic isn't, it's not being recorded by the trace." "No," Harry said, "I don't think it would be." "Why not?" Harry considered how to answer this. He thought about what Dumbledore had said the previous day about the modified truth about the disruption of a full public accounting. He wasn't going to lie, but he could be accurate without being comprehensive. "The trace detects conventional magical signatures," he said. "Mine isn't entirely conventional." "Not entirely." Williamson wrote something, stopped, wrote something else. "Mr. Potter, what you're describing, the events in that chamber, go considerably beyond what any student at this school or any adult practitioner I'm aware of would be capable of." He looked at Harry directly. "Are you saying that you, an 11-year-old first year, stopped a dark wizard single-handedly?" "I had help from my friends up to the final chamber," Harry said. "But in the final chamber?" "Yes," Harry said. "In the final chamber, yes." Williamson looked at his clipboard, then at Harry. Then at the clipboard again. He seemed to be making a decision about which version of reality to commit to, the official one which had no framework for this, or the factual one which was sitting across the table from him looking entirely relaxed. "Right," he said finally. "I think, for the purposes of the official report, we will note that the situation was resolved through the intervention of students acting under exceptional circumstances, with specifics to be confirmed pending further investigation." He made a final note. "No charges will be filed for the corridor breach, given the context." A pause. "Informal recommendation to Headmaster Dumbledore that the school's security infrastructure be reviewed." "I think Dumbledore agrees with that," Harry said. Williamson looked at him once more, a long look, the look of a man storing something away for later consideration, something he wasn't going to know what to do with for a while. "You're quite composed," he said, "for someone your age." "I had a good night," Harry said, and stood up and thanked them for their time. The corridor outside the conference room was long and quiet, the lunch hour noise of the great hall a distant murmur. Harry walked it slowly, not because he was tired, but because the castle felt different today, in a way he was still learning to articulate. Not quieter, more resolved. As if something that had been vibrating at a slightly wrong frequency had finally corrected itself. He stopped at the window at the end of the corridor and looked out over the grounds. The snow was still on the grounds, but different now, the kind of snow that was thinking about melting, the edges softened, the shadows in it blue instead of purple. The sky was a high pale winter blue and the lake reflected it, and the grounds between were white and still. He felt the castle. All of it, the sleeping and the awake, the troubled and the comfortable, the 500 lives distributed through its towers and corridors, each one a specific quality of warmth, distinct and individual, readable as fingerprints. Hermione in the hospital wing, methodical pulse of someone deep in a book. Ron, same location, slightly irregular rhythm of someone falling asleep while trying not to. Quirrell, far bed, the new quiet of a single simple flame, dim but steady, holding. Dumbledore in his office, the specific vast and ancient quality of his magical presence, warm and complicated, currently still. Snape in the dungeons, cold and precise. The dog on the third floor, deeply and contentedly asleep. The stone no longer in the castle. Dumbledore had moved it last night, the specific resonance of it simply gone, present one moment, absent the next, the old hum of it lifted from the building's bones. The castle without the stone was lighter, as if it had been holding its breath around that specific heavy secret and could now simply breathe. Harry breathed with it. He thought about Voldemort's last words through Quirrell's throat, "I will return. I will always return." He thought about what that meant in the context of what Harry was. The force that had chosen him at Godric's Hollow, that had recognized in the infant who survived something worth kindling, the quality of a thing that refused permanent ending, was not a force that feared returns. Returns were its nature. Everything came back in one form or another. The question was what form and what it meant and what you did with it. Voldemort's return, when it came, would be what it had always been, the attempt of something that had broken itself in the service of endurance, straining against the natural order, demanding that the universe make exceptions for it. And Harry Potter would be what he had always been, the living argument that the universe didn't. He wasn't afraid of the return. He wasn't even impatient with it. There would be time, years of preparation, of understanding, of Hermione finding the texts and Ron thinking through the strategy and Harry learning the full extent of what lived in his chest. Years of Hogwarts and the knowledge it contained, of Dumbledore's careful, comprehensive truth-telling. He was going to hold the headmaster to that, of finding the pieces of fractured soul scattered through the world and understanding what unmade them. He was 11, he had time. The last days of term had a specific quality that Harry hadn't experienced before, the unwinding of a long, sustained effort, the loosening of something held tight, students releasing into holiday mode with the enthusiasm of people who had been academic for long enough and were ready to be briefly feral. Hermione's visible stress level decreased by approximately 40% on the last day of classes, which was still higher than most people's baseline but represented genuine relaxation for her. Ron was teaching Harry chess in the evenings. Harry was, by Ron's assessment, improving, but in a way that suggests you're going to be genuinely brilliant at this in about 6 months and I'm going to regret teaching you. Harry took this as a compliment and Ron confirmed that it was. Harry played Ron 3 games and lost all 3. The losses felt useful in the specific way that Ron losses felt useful, instructive, generously narrated, full of suggestions that were actually compliments disguised as criticism. He was learning something real. On the last morning, coming down to breakfast early, Harry found Neville Longbottom sitting on the stairs by himself with his hands folded in his lap and the specific posture of someone who has been trying to find courage for a while and is still in the process. Harry sat down beside him. "All right," he said. Neville looked up. He had a round, honest face that showed everything it felt, and what it was currently feeling was the specific combination of embarrassment and something he was working past. "I wanted to say thank you," Neville said, "for the remember-all thing at the start of term." "It was yours," Harry said. "I know, but you," Neville paused. "Malfoy does things like that and usually no one, usually it just," he stopped. "You didn't have to do that and you did it anyway, like it was obvious." "It was obvious," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Not to most people." Harry thought about this, about the years in the cupboard, about the specific invisible quality of a child no one defends, about the way wrong things become invisible through repetition. "It should be obvious," he said, "to most people, but I know what you mean." Neville nodded slowly. He was putting something together that Harry could see taking shape on his face, some version of understanding that was still forming but was going in the right direction. "I've been hearing things," he said carefully, "about what happened in the third floor. People don't know the details, but things get around. Were you in danger?" "Not really," Harry said honestly. Neville looked at him sideways. "Were other people in danger?" "A little, but they handled themselves well." Neville was quiet for a moment. I want to be the kind of person who handles things well," he said. I'm not brave the way you are." "You're braver than you know," Harry said and meant it, felt it because he could feel it, the specific quality of Neville's life warmth, the genuine thing underneath the anxious exterior, steady and warmer than Neville gave it credit for. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone who doesn't entirely believe the compliment but isn't entirely dismissing it either. "I'll work on it," he said. "I know you will," Harry said. And he knew it the way he knew many things now, not through reasoning but through that direct perception of what was actually present, the life spark of a person and what it contained. They sat together on the stairs for a few minutes more, and it was easy in the way that unexpected things were sometimes easy. And then the breakfast noise from the great hall picked up and they went in together. The feast on the last night was warm and loud, and the kind of happy that comes from a term ending and a holiday beginning, uncomplicated and genuine. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate well, and listened to the noise of 500 people who were collectively ready for December and fires and home. Dumbledore made a speech that was, as always, slightly oblique. He mentioned the year's events in general terms, challenges met, things learned, the ongoing business of growing up in a complicated world. He looked at the Gryffindor table once during the middle of it with the specific look that was meant for Harry and that Harry received and acknowledged with a slight nod. Fred and George had acquired a trumpet somewhere and were playing it very quietly at the far end of the Gryffindor table in what they described as a discreet celebration. It was not discreet. It was, however, cheerful. Percy Weasley told them to stop 4 times. They stopped on the 5th attempt, which turned out to be from Ron saying, "Put it away, it's embarrassing," which carried more weight than the prefect authority. Draco Malfoy was at the Slytherin table, eating, not looking at Harry. Harry noticed him the way he noticed most things, with attention but without agenda. He'd been thinking about Malfoy lately, in the specific way you thought about something that was developing into a shape you couldn't quite see yet. The boy at the Gryffindor table on their first night, the performance of it, the clumsy provocation, the practiced sneer that never quite covered what was underneath. He was a boy performing a role he'd been assigned before he'd had a vote. Harry didn't like him, but he understood the architecture, and understanding it made the dislike uncomplicated, not hate, not contempt, just awareness. Malfoy glanced up once and caught Harry looking at him. Harry didn't look away, he didn't do anything. He just met Malfoy's gaze with the same easy attention he gave everything, steady and without agenda, and held it until Malfoy looked away first with the specific expression of someone who hasn't yet developed the vocabulary for a situation they're encountering. That, Harry thought, was a conversation that had years in it. The Hogwarts Express left at 11 and Harry sat in the compartment with Ron and Hermione, and they played Exploding Snap and talked and ate from a very significant pile of sweets that the twins had pressed on Ron before the train departed. The Scottish landscape moved past the windows, snow and hills and the grey sky of December, and the specific accumulated weight of the term sat differently in Harry's chest than he'd expected. Not heavy. Not the specific exhaustion of sustained tension finally released, something more like settled. The rightness of a thing that has gone the way it should go. Hermione had a book in her lap but wasn't reading it. She was looking at the window with an expression Harry recognized as her thinking face, not the working version, the deep background processing that ran quietly and surfaced as notes, but something more reflective, more personal. "Next year," she said, not quite to either of them. "We need to use next year properly. If Dumbledore is going to give us the actual information about the Horcruxes, he will," Harry said. "Then we need to understand what can destroy them before we know where they are." She turned from the window. Basilisk venom, fiendfire, something with enough magical intensity to unmake an anchored soul. She paused. "And theoretically something like what you did in the chamber. If the Phoenix fire can displace a soul fragment from a human host, it might be able to unmake one in an object." "We'll find out," Harry said. "That's the plan," Ron said. "Find out, handle it, move on." He ate a chocolate frog, glanced at the card Morgana again. Obviously it was always Morgana, and tossed it to Hermione because she collected them. "Simple." "Nothing about this is simple," Hermione said. "You know what I mean," Ron said. Harry looked at both of them. The train rocked on its rails. Outside, Scotland was turning slowly into England, the snow thinning to frost, the hills going lower. Ahead somewhere, London and King's Cross and the Dursleys, which was a circumstance Harry had spent the whole term not thinking about because there was more interesting material to think about. He thought about it now briefly and found that it was smaller than it used to be. The specific gravity of Privet Drive, the Dursleys and the cupboard, and the particular misery of those summers, it had lost some of its weight. Not because things had improved there or would improve there without effort, but because Harry had spent 5 months being something enormous, and the cupboard could not scale to contain it. He thought about what he was going back to and what he would do there, and he made a quiet decision, several quiet decisions, the kind that didn't need to be spoken because they were already made and the making of them was private. The Dursleys were going to need to recalibrate some expectations. He thought about that with mild satisfaction and went back to his exploding snap cards. King's Cross was loud and warm and dense with returning students and waiting families. Harry stepped through the barrier with Ron and Hermione and felt the specific gear shift of returning to the non-magical world, not the magic disappearing. The Phoenix Force didn't diminish because he crossed a municipal threshold, but the texture of things changing, from the ambient, saturated magic quality of Hogwarts to the ordinary human complexity of a train station in London. Hermione's parents were waiting at the barrier. her mother with the specific expression of a parent who has been maintaining composed patience for 1 minute more than was comfortable, and her father who immediately started asking questions about school with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who liked the information itself. Hermione hugged them both and turned back to Harry and Ron. "Right," she said to both of them. "I'm going to be in the library by the second week of January, and I want notes from both of you about what we discussed." "Hermione, it's the holidays," Ron said. "I know what it is," she said in the tone that invited him to find this objectionable and understand that he would not succeed. She turned to Harry. Her expression was the most unguarded it ever got, not the professional face, not the determined face, but the actual one, the one that lived behind the competence and the books. "Are you going to be all right at your aunt and uncle's?" "Yes," Harry said, and meant it. She looked at him for a moment, reading him the way she read things, carefully, honestly, without overlaying what she wanted to see. She seemed satisfied. "Good," she said. "See you in September." She turned and went to her parents, and Harry could hear her mother asking something and Hermione already answering in the way she answered things, comprehensive and slightly faster than necessary. Ron's family descended in the specific way the Weasleys descended on things, simultaneously and from multiple angles, Mrs. Weasley taking in Harry's trainers with an expression that contained an entire novel. The twins immediately starting something with Percy that already involved a rubber chicken. Ginny Weasley appearing from behind her mother to look at Harry with wide brown eyes, and then finding somewhere else to look with the efficiency of someone who had been told something embarrassing and was powerfully aware of it. Mr. Weasley pumped Harry's hand and asked about the train and Muggle things in the specific way he asked about Muggle things, with the delight of a man who finds the ordinary world endlessly fascinating, which Harry found both touching and slightly funny. "You'll come for the summer," Mrs. Weasley said to Harry. Not a question. The specific tone of a thing already decided by someone who had enough love to include additional people in it without diminishment of the existing supply. "Yes, please," Harry said, and she beamed and moved on to organizing her children. Ron appeared at his shoulder. "End of summer," he said. "Come to the burrow." "Mum means it, she's already planning what room." "She doesn't need to do that," Harry said. "Tell her that," Ron said. "Go on, I'll wait." He grinned. "It'll keep you busy for a while." Harry laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came without thinking about it. Ron put out his fist. Harry bumped it. "See you in September," Ron said, and went to collect his trunk from the pile where Fred had hidden it under George's cloak. Vernon Dursley was waiting by the barrier. He had the specific expression he wore when things weren't going the way he'd planned, neck slightly dark, jaw set, arms crossed with the performative certainty of someone who was very clear on how the world was supposed to work and found the world's tendency to deviate personally offensive. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back at him. There was a moment brief, full, the kind of moment that accomplished something without anything being said, in which Vernon clearly expected the specific quality of anxious compliance that had historically defined Harry's returns home, and encountered instead something that had spent 5 months being chosen by a cosmic force of renewal and was no longer particularly interested in performing smallness for anyone. Vernon blinked. "Boy," he started. "Hello, Uncle Vernon," Harry said pleasantly. "Good drive in," Vernon stared at him. "What, we should probably get the trunk in the boot," Harry said. "It's heavy, I'll manage it." He lifted his trunk. It was heavy, but not in any way that presented a genuine challenge, and wheeled it toward the exit without hurrying, and after a moment he heard Vernon following, which was the correct order of things, and Harry thought they'd both noticed it. The drive back to Surrey was not silent, but it was different. Vernon made 2 attempts at establishing the standard hierarchy, and both of them encountered the same quality of pleasant, unmoved attention. Not rude, not defiant, just present and unimpressed and entirely unwilling to pretend to be less than it was. By the time they reached the motorway, Vernon had gone quiet, and Harry was watching the English countryside move past the window and feeling the warmth in his chest at its steady resting state and thinking about next year. Hermione's research. Dumbledore's promised comprehensive truth. The Horcruxes somewhere in the world, each one a piece of fractured soul anchored to an object waiting to be found. The specific character of the problem, its scale and its complexity. He thought about what he knew and what he needed to know, and the gap between them was large but not, crucially, discouraging. Large problems were interesting. Large problems with time to address them were simply plans. He had time, he had friends who were extraordinary in the specific ways that the problem required. He had something in his chest that had existed since before the wizarding world named it and would exist after, and it was his, fully and completely, not a thing he carried but a thing he was. Privet Drive arrived. He got out of the car, lifted his trunk. Carried it through the front door with the ease of someone who had walked through black fire and purple fire, and a possession attempt and 12 feet of troll this semester. and found the trunk, by comparison, entirely manageable. He put the trunk in the smallest bedroom, not the cupboard, not anymore. That renegotiation had happened in the first 5 minutes of last summer and was not up for revision, and opened the window. The garden was gray December, frost on the grass, the neighbor's cat sitting on the fence, entirely ordinary, entirely unmagical, the specific dull persistence of the non-magical world going about its seasonal business. Harry held out his right hand. The flame came, the same flame it had always been. Golden white, clean, burning without consuming. Sitting in his palm in the gray December air of a muggle suburban garden with the same quality of absolute presence that it had in Ollivander's shop on the day his wand had hummed its first note, in the Hogwarts common room by the fire, in the final chamber of the third-floor corridor. It was slightly larger than it had been in September. Not dramatically. Just more of itself, fuller, the way things grew when they were in the right conditions, when they were no longer being suppressed or hidden or apologized for. The warmth in his chest hummed. Not words. Not the vast thought that was too big to be his own that had visited him in the dark of his first night in the dormitory. Just the hum, steady and low, the sound of something present and continuous, the sound of a fire that didn't need fuel because it was its own fuel and always had been. The cat on the fence looked at the flame and blinked its amber eyes. Harry smiled. Not the polite smile, not the careful social tool he'd built over 11 years of managing other people's discomfort with his existence. The real one, the one that had been making increasingly frequent appearances since September, since the common room and the library and the chess games and the express, and all the small daily evidences that the world contained people who showed up after they knew what you were. He closed his hand. The flame went out. He left the window open anyway. Somewhere above the gray December clouds, if you knew what to look for and had the specific kind of sight that Harry was still learning to use fully, somewhere up there, moving slow and vast and warm through the upper air, the presence that had chosen a dying infant in a ruined house in Godric's Hollow and found there something worth kindling made one long, slow circuit of the English sky. It had been waiting 11 years. It could wait a little longer. It had, after all the time there was.